The moment you've all been waiting for, the new Meet Echo session is open. It's really exciting. So, we should have been doing this for the 5 minutes we had. Remember this morning when we didn't have a scribe for the afternoon and I said that was going to make you do that after lunch? Here we are. Thank you, scribes, in the morning. Special prizes are going to be handed out later if that entices anybody. Somebody who types fast.
I'm tempted, but I don't know how good I'd be at it.
Well, we have backups, so if you can do your best, and we can maybe have 2 backups. I think Will's backing up. Maybe one more person to back up Rajiv for the afternoon. Means you don't have to do it tomorrow.
I'm guessing we go into the note.
You click on the notes link at the top of the agenda, and then I have the skeleton of the agenda is already pasted in. So
I click the note tool in.
that is not going to get you in the right place. No, I'm sorry, because we had to split the session. Go to the agenda link, and at the top there's a link to the notes. I figured we'd just keep all the notes in one session. Okay. Is that a bad call? Rather than have 4 sets of notes. All right, that's how we've planned it. Okay, are we good? Can you manage with 1 backup? Will, we're counting on you. Excellent. Okay, so I think next up we have Spencer, I think, is going to talk about requirements with James. Spencer, are you there? Are you ready?
Spencer is here, and Spencer should be trying to share slides right about now. Please let me know when you all see that.
We can hear you just fine, and here is your screen.
Okay, great.
If you could make it maybe a little bit bigger for the people in the room, it might be advantageous.
Sure. Oops, sorry. Let me just make sure I'm on the right screen doing that. Is that better?
Folks who are further from the screen, thumbs up. Good, good. Okay. Take it away, Spencer.
Cool. And let me just blow this one up a little bit too. So I'm Spencer Dawkins, and just doing a short update on the requirements draft so far. And this is as of the beginning of the session that we're having. So anyway, just to remind people, this was a document that started out being mostly about use cases and has started to collect requirements as well. And we have not, James and I have not submitted a update for this, but we have been busily collecting issues. And I want to thank especially Suhas for meeting with us. That's been very helpful to talk about things that have been discussed since IETF 115. And of course, we'd love to hear from other working group participants as we move forward. So creating issues right now, as of this moment, we have 14 issues that are open in the repo. And can people kind of see that okay? That's, well, we'll see. So anyway, some of these were deferring for now because they depend on other issues, and a couple of them, basically, we've been trying to focus on things that were closer to requirements. But we did have 3 issues that we are hoping to hear more about in this meeting. So things we need input about from the working group about, and those are these 3. So if I was starting from the bottom, these are basically just making sure that we understood what supported media packaging was um, in the minds of the working group. Uh, I am interested in the discussions that we've been having in this repo actually about configurable latency and the presentation earlier today on DOQ. Um, what was DTP, but is now DOQ, was very helpful for that. Thank you to the presenters. And then just definitions of the various things that are not media producers and consumers that seem to be being talked about in the working group. Some of them are mentioned in the charter. I would hate to say that whether I thought all of them were or not, but anyway, just like I say, just trying to add definitions about that so we can better understand what's going on there. I should say this, 20 minutes now, and it's okay with me if the chairs take some of the minutes that MeetEcho needed to get started out of this slot. I really just want to put things in front of the working group for a moment or two, and just like I said, just to let people see what we're talking about there.
Go ahead and take the full time. If for some reason we need to throw ourselves in front of the doors to keep them from kicking us out, we might be able to recover 10 minutes that way.
Oh, that's bring on the violence. Awesome. Okay, excellent. So, starting at the bottom, like I say, this one, talking with Suhas and with James, this seems minor, but just basically an assumption that we're supporting CMAF, and in addition, that we want to support non-contained in using the term raw elementary bitstream media, and we want to have agility to accommodate future container formats. So that's one of the ones that's on there. Jonathan, do you have a thought?
I had a question, which is to say, if we're supporting non-contained formats, sorry, Jonathan Lennox, does this mean we also have to have a way to specify synchronization between them? Or do you just assume they play independently at whatever rate they wish?
And I am delighted to hear Suhas and James if they have thoughts about that. This one is not one I think I'm smart about.
I think the comment came because for audio and some of the use cases, supporting CMAF is basically overloads the metadata that goes along with the header and other things. And we wanted, this has been in the charter as well, we need to support more than one kind of formats. And with respect to synchronization, we need to think about it, Jonathan.
Yeah, I think the clear use case here is you're gatewaying from a video conference to this, where CMAF doesn't make a lot of sense, but you still want to be able to get lip sync.
Exactly.
But independently for each participant. So I think that's interesting.
I think we need to think about what should that format look like. We don't want to kind of repeat the entire RTB payload format. At the same time, can we do something new but simple but meets the requirements of the use cases that we are thinking about?
Right. So just let me ask the question: is what we just said that that basically the raw elementary bitstream media is stuff that we don't have any container format that's reasonable to use, and that we might have an expectation that if existing container formats are useful and usable, that we would use them since we have agility?
I have
Carol?
Kirill in queue next, but I'm not sure he was going to answer that question. But let's see. Kirill?
I'm not sure we can have just raw elementary stream. Like, you're gonna have to have timestamps somewhere, and then it basically means you're gonna introduce your own container. We just rather say we should support multiple formats and do not go about specifying like all of them. We already have said is like CMAF, we will support it. If someone wants to support some additional format that is lighter in terms of overhead, like for audio, for example, we should be able to support it. But us saying we would just take a bit stream and shove it into our data model, I don't think it's going to work.
I would like to, Suhas, I would like to agree, Kirill. I think it should not be non-contained. It should be more like we need to come up with or pick up another container format that would work for real-time media or cases where we don't have too much of bandwidth to spend on.
Okay, I have Will and Mo in queue.
Yeah, to me, this question starts off one of the core ideas for this interim. When we say support, is what we're defining a protocol where I can advertise and discover a codec or a container, and then I can negotiate one that both the publisher and subscriber support? And do we leave that open? And do we go the extra step to say we've defined that base protocol, and by the way, here's one profile or implementation of it, which is CMAF, and then we specify special signaling for CMAF? Is that our intent here, or is our intent to limit these codecs or containers such that if I want to introduce a new codec, I have to come back to the IETF and renegotiate it into the specification?
Okay, I have Mo in queue, and then I put myself in queue to possibly answer the question as an individual. So when I get around to that point, I'll run around the room.
Why don't you go ahead, Ted? I was not going to answer that question.
So speaking as an individual, so I'll move away from the chair's table here. I think that you're describing something that looks more like a systems engineering architecture than what we're trying to build, right? So if we're talking about this as kind of the next generation media transport infrastructure, the question of what codecs you can transport across it is not really something you want to limit at the day you build it, right? You want to say this is a generic mechanism for identifying a resource and causing it to pass through the media distribution infrastructure to reach one or more receivers, right? So we've thought about this in pub/sub terms. We can think about it in other terms, but functionally, I think the idea that as part of that you have the negotiation step built into it is probably at the application level above the transport. So the application is the part that does what codecs are we going to use in this, and what container formats are those codecs going to sit in would be part of the application sitting on top of the transport, not at the transport itself. Now you notice I stood away from this desk in order to give you that opinion, because it's my opinion as an individual, not my opinion as a consensus caller. So it's definitely the case that other people may disagree. Although it looked like Roberto was agreeing with me, I only saw one person who was that clear about it.
Ted, can you help me with the queue a little bit? I've got Mo in queue, and James and Victor.
Right. So the queue does stand Mo, James, Victor in that order. Does anybody want to speak to that question that Will just answered, or not? Because otherwise, we're just going to.
That's what I needed help with. Thank you.
Victor wants to speak to this question, and then we'll go to. Oh, okay. I didn't hear James. So we'll go James, Victor, Mo.
Yeah, specifically the question of format agility. I believe so. I believe the way it works in the at least current warp draft is you can advertise multiple formats, and the consumer essentially gets to pick which format to subscribe, and you do not have to recognize all of the formats advertised. Oh, that's a very brief answer.
Right. And Victor is pointing out that we are somewhat wandering along beside the work on the warp draft. And I am looking at stuff in the repo for what seemed like to me to be helpful to look at as requirements, but we are shooting, we are moving and shooting at a moving target.
James and then Mo.
To directly answer Will's point, he had me up to the point where he was describing CMAF specificness, and to that I kind of disagree, and I think there's some issues, I think in the warp draft, I could be mistaken, where it seems that the consensus and steer that we're going towards is that a lot of the signaling of codecs and such happens exclusively inside of the container format. And I think that will actually hamper both our ability to remain container agile, and it'll also impact implementations in what they must and must not support. And being able to negotiate container and codecs will be is something that we should probably have in place in order to be agile across the board.
Right. I should mention that one of the things I talked with the chairs about was just wanting to kind of put things in front of the working group now and not try to resolve all of the open issues in detail in 20 minutes. Because if we could pull that off, I would be happy. But so I'd like to get the other two issues up there before the end of my time.
Okay, so we're going to do Mo and Roberto, and James, I guess you re-raised your hand, but Mo and Roberto, and then we'll go to the other two issues.
Exactly, perfect.
On Will's point, I think that media formats and the descriptions of them do need to be at a higher level. I think that discussion is long overdue. We've been talking about the need for that discussion for I think every meeting since the BOF. So it's good to bring it up. Let's finally have it, but I'm pretty sure it's not going to be at this transport level. So let's figure out where it belongs, but I'm pretty sure it's not going to be at this lowest layer. For standardizing on CMAF versus allowing other, especially raw formats, I think what Bernard presented at the beginning was useful for people to understand. The browsers themselves already support web codecs in raw elementary stream formats. So there's not really that much to specify if we want to go that route. And it kind of dovetails nicely with what's already available in browsers. So forcing everyone to do CMAF, just like forcing everyone to do MSE to be able to play a track, doesn't make sense for all use cases, maybe not even most use cases. So if your media didn't originate in a containerized CMAF format, it may not make sense to force everyone through that interface and through that overhead and through those extra headers in order to be able to support their use cases. Raw elementary stream formats similar to web codecs, I think would be relatively easy to support and relatively easy to specify.
Cool. So let me ask.
So we still had one comment.
Actually specify it. I can write up some text about how this could be added to the draft. Raw elementary stream format.
Okay, cool. And if I could make a suggestion to the chairs, you might, as we tick these things off, you might want to consider whether that needs to be on the issues list for tomorrow or not. And I trust you all to do the right thing. Roberto? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, it just takes time to get the microphone. I
I actually like how this has been declared. It should support CMAF, I suppose. It should support something other than CMAF, and that is a good test for having the agility to support other things. I think I ask, in my mind, the other following questions, which I think lead to the same outcome maybe, which is the protocol the manifest? Could it support different manifests? Can the manifest change during the lifetime of the session? If we have non-muxed audio and video, how do I prioritize one versus the other? This actually starts to get into the hard part of whether we need to understand the packaging or not, or at least at some layer understanding it. Can I choose a different muxing of these things for different clients, assuming I'm doing a one-to-many? And an observation that optimal, which is not the same necessarily as good enough, would require visibility into this at the lowest level so that we could prioritize and or chain things in ways that don't cause problems.
Cool. So that was
This is sound. I think we're probably going to pick up this issue at some point tomorrow. I added it to our list. So if you want to show the other two in the balance of your time.
Absolutely. I can go through this one quickly, but I was mostly, like I say, I want to say that the presentation earlier today was very helpful for me when we were talking about, there was a considerable amount of discussion about configurable latency in issue 72. The presentation today was very helpful to me. And I would, like I say, I was just, if people think that that's something that we would want to have happen, this is talking about some of the next level of details that we might want to talk about. Say, you know, there are configuration things that are going to affect latency, like allocated buffer sizes and things like that. But two things I would say. One is what is, you know, if you're bumping up against the configured latency, what are the responsibilities of the transport layer, and what are the responsibilities of the application? And that's probably, having thought about it since the presentation earlier today, that's probably a good summary of what I'm thinking about now. Colin?
Second, I'm trying to get all the right unmutes happen here. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
Let me say, if we were just using Zoom instead of 4 different systems, my life would be much better as a remote participant. So I'm not really understanding you gave buffer sizes as an example, but I'm not actually, I mean, obviously if your buffer sizes are too small, it fails. And generally you send things as soon as you can, regardless of your size of your buffers. I think I'm just not understanding this. Like what is it about buffer size? What is it about configuring your buffer sizes that changes your latency here? I'm sort of missing that. I'm probably missing which buffer.
So I think that is perhaps a red herring, and the actual herring part of it is saying that there are choices that implementations would be making that might have some influence, and you use the example of what if they're too small, but is that the only thing that gets configured? Does that make sense?
Yeah, like, I mean, when people always say, I mean, I can imagine passing down, I mean, in WebRTC, of course, we pass down hints of like whether your preference was various things, right?
Right.
But I'm just not sure what hints we're going to pass down here. I'm not arguing there aren't any. I'm just not sure what they are yet. That's all.
Right. So I have something that I want to say.
Next level of detail, I guess, nails it. But I mean, I'm
yeah.
I'm not seeing it. That's basically what I'm saying here.
Yeah, exactly. So I didn't see anybody else in queue for this one, and that was not actually a challenge. But oh, hi, Will.
Sorry, late queue. Yes,
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
the notion that it sounds like configurable latency, that some people envisage there's a property and you set latency equals 250 milliseconds or 10,000 and it just happens. It can't happen that way because your latency is a function of how your transport's working. Are we doing GOP per stream or datagram per stream? So I think when it says configurable, it really means that it can satisfy different latency regimes. I think as a group we should agree on the regimes we intend to satisfy. But in satisfying them, there's going to be a lot of things you need to adjust and configure in the protocol in order to achieve the latency target.
And I agree with what Will just said. Just as a clarifying thing. I understood your point to be that latency isn't magic, and I agree with that. It's basically saying, so what happens if what you're getting is not the latency that you desperately need? What happens then? I use the example. It's probably a bad example, but I use the example of whose job is it to start doing FEC? If you're going to be dropping things. That could be a transport responsibility. It could be a application responsibility. Whose job is it? And there are things that I don't care what the answer is as long as there's only one. Does that help?
May I answer, or are we holding queue?
Yeah. No, please do answer. Yeah.
A little bit. You can't just randomly apply FEC or not in order to achieve latency. This is an orchestrated solution. So
right.
Again, I go back to my prior point. I don't know if there's consensus on what latency regimes we're attempting to support. And it would be nice if we could clarify those so that there's agreement on what needs to be achieved. Is everyone here focused on real time or interactive latency? Or if you want to do the Super Bowl at 10 seconds latency, is that covered by what we're planning to build?
I guess the question I'd ask is, what do you change in warp based on which one of those three things you're doing? I mean, I'm just asking as a question to help drive this requirement. That's all.
I think you change how the wire protocol, how the objects, what they carry. Do they carry whole GOPs? Do they carry datagrams? Do they carry frames? That's fundamentally going to put you in a different bucket for latency.
Excellent. So I've got Morten and Christian, I think still in queue. Morten?
Hello, Morten Petersen. So
hi.
So the way that I see this is that the configurable latency should be comes from the application. I mean, it's and then based on what the application needs, you may want to do different things at the protocol layer. Like, for example, when do you decide to cancel in this? When do you decide to not continue trying to transmit a frame? Or as you say, like, how do you balance the amount of effect you are applying, or for how long do you try to keep repairing something? And there seems to be like a lot of different applications with lots of different requirements to latency, and I don't think that it would be a good idea to specify in the protocol a certain range of latencies. It should be an application requirement, and then based on that, the protocol mechanisms should adjust potentially.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you. And Christian.
Christian Huitema. If it was up to me, there would not be any mention of things like latency or FEC in a requirement document, because what we want is not specific targets on latency. What we want is say, okay, in this requirement document, we are discussing what the designer of the protocol should look at. And the first thing they should look at is what scenarios are we discussing.
Right, and
in fact,
you're absolutely right that I'm pushing down. I push down past the level. I push down past the next level to to say what is what are we trying to achieve, and then how might we achieve it is the third level down. So, thank you for calling me out on that.
Yeah, and so my what I would like to see in the requirement document is starting that says, what are we building? Well, we are building a transport protocol for sending media over quick between 2 points or something like that. What are the scenarios we have in mind? And those scenarios have requirements about how quickly we can change channel and how the kind of latency range that we have to have and things like that. That's basically it. We saw this morning, for example, that there were effectively two kinds of latency ranges. You have the latency ranges of streaming of several seconds in which the WAP protocol works fine, and you have the latency range of a couple of 100 milliseconds, which is basically larger than the delay between two group of blocks, in which does not work fine. And so, so basically knowing these ranges would be good, but it has to be at the scenario level. It cannot be by hard numbers.
Right.
Okay, so I'm going to interject myself here for a moment, Spencer, and
please do.
I just want to remind everybody to remember we have a charter. Yay! We're not fighting about the charter. We're past that point. So if you ever have a question of whether something's in or outside of the remit of the working group, start with the charter. And you can raise it for further clarifications after that point. But the charter actually makes some of this clear enough. And there's definitely bits in that need further clarification. It currently says low, where these ranges would be a lot more realistic as statements. But I think we don't want to back this discussion all the way up.
Right.
And I just want to make that clear for the folks involved in this. Sorry, Suhas and Jonathan were actually in queue before I inserted myself.
Thanks, Ted. I think my point was on similar lines what you pointed out. I think that what we design should enable the tools that would allow the use cases or applications that has been chartered. And we need to make that happen, and what that requires might boil down to what we support at the transport level, but we should have a set of tools for the application that's using to make this choice for itself.
Cool. Jonathan.
Oh, yes, Jonathan Lennox. I think one question when we say configurable is configurable by whom and when. So like if we're saying, like for instance, I as somebody deploying, a streaming service decide that, okay, for this streaming service, the latency is going to be, 1,500 milliseconds, and I design my whole system to work with that, that's one thing. And then obviously I choose things like how am I encoding the media and GOPS and whatnot. But if we say, hey, somebody deploys a service and the receiver can decide whether they want 250 milliseconds or 10 seconds, in the same service, outside of the control of the streaming service, that's a very different proposition. And, if we say that, okay, every streaming service has to be able to support the receiver making that decision independently from them, that's a much harder requirement. So I think when we say configurable, I think that needs to be decided, by whom and on what level of scope.
Right. Could I just say something else that I'm bleeding into the third issue, and I'm trying to behave because that's not what y'all are looking at, but I'm going to have something to say about that in a minute. Well, okay. So Jonathan said his thing, and the thing that I was looking at, that I was thinking about this, where things began to become much clearer to me during the presentation this morning is that the DTP, DOP, DOQ measurements that are being done so far aren't taking account of relays. That Christian's work is doing that. It's pretty focused on that. But so it seemed like to me that once we started talking about an environment where relays could be cascaded, nested, whatever the word I should be using, especially if they cross operational domains. And so that actually gets me to my third thing that I was hoping to learn more about this week, which was actually doing the definitions of and I am trying to behave, Ted, according to the charter, but basically just trying to understand what there is between the first publisher and the last consumer is, and whether that's something that we need to understand or care about at all. And I think that is kind of poking at what Ted was talking about with bleeding into systems engineering kind of considerations. We know CDN people are going to care about this, but how much of it do we care about in the MOQ protocol itself? So that got me off the previous issue, but just for this one, just making sure that I can describe what it means to have a cache, what it means to have functionality for media replication, what it means to have functionality for transcoding media, things like that. And the first three of those are explicitly mentioned in the charter. I'm just trying to make sure that I know how to define them. And that's getting into some of the expectations for what these things do. But like I say, let's just start me off with just trying to define them. So anyway, so those are my three issues. And Ted, you're in queue.
So I once again have moved away from my chair seat to stand up to make a comment. And that is, as we define them, one of the things I care that we define about them a great deal is their privacy and security properties.
Yes.
You said in one of your previous comments in the day, assuming for a minute back-to-back user agents or something similar. And the back of my head said, subpoena, in a very loud tone, because that's one of the things that the back of my head does these days whenever I hear about a place where the media gets exposed between two entities. This is a place where I get to insert a national security letter or a subpoena or something like that. And we're going through a lot of trouble in the IETF to limit those, and I would really hate for us not to be careful in our design to make sure that we introduce them only when they are absolutely required for the correct functionality of the protocol. For example, between the network stack and the renderer, at some point, you really have to have access to the real data. The renderer is going to want that. But making sure that we think very, very carefully about introducing it in other places is part of what I would like in these definitions. And I think one of the consequences of that goes to some of the things that were happening in chat before I stood up and stopped looking at chat, and that is thinking about what are inside the container formats and therefore likely to be encrypted, and what are exposed outside. I don't know if Miria is still in the group at the moment or not. It's kind of late for her, but she and I are both co-authors of a set of drafts on explicit signals and path signals. And I think what we're talking about here falls into that rubric of explicit path signals. What is it that we want the network elements along a path to understand so that they can correctly behave according to the protocol's understanding of their role? And that's what we put outside and send to them. And everything else that it is not required for their correct behavior according to their role, they don't have any access to, or at least any ability to influence. Because it may be that you have cases where they see it incidentally, like ECN, even if they're not ECN devices, et cetera. So those were the 2 points I wanted to make as an individual, and now I'll go back to sitting down.
Well, thank you. I think it is long past time for me to graciously surrender the baton back to the chairs for my session. And I noticed that there were 48 messages in the chat that I was not paying attention to, 49. Hi, Roberto. So I hope we will have these messages stuck down at the bottom of the notes as well. Like at the end of the meeting and stuff, but you know what I mean. Anyway, thank you, and it is always a pleasure.
Yeah, the Zulip and all that chat is archived. You can get that forever.
Yeah, but I want to make sure people see it.
Thank you, Spencer, and we did go a little bit longer on that section, but I think it definitely.
I apologize.
No, we as the chairs obviously let it go on because we thought it was valuable. So thank you. So next we have Luke and Victor to sort of talk about where things are with WARP, and that will lead us up. We have an hour budgeted, but we're roughly a half an hour behind schedule, so I'm not sure how long you guys will talk. We'll just kind of play it by ear, take a break when we feel tired. But are you guys ready to take it away? Do you want my computer or yours? Whichever. All right. Do you update your computer? It's updated. You have the slides right now. Yeah. Jet lag edition. All right, that showed up automatically over there, and then one of these must be. Where's the play button? I'll let you figure it out. Slideshow. Victory. All right.
Hello, everyone. So, Luke from Twitch, and this is Victor.
Victor from Google.
No, it's okay. Yeah, these slides are very last minute. As people know, I was stuck on a plane for a while, so this was last night at 3 a.m., but it'll be good. Not my usual hand-drawn style, but let's go. Do you have the next slide here? Oh, there you go. So there were 3 major PRs we merged since the last IETF meeting. There were some minor ones too, but wanted to cover at least the changes and kind of explain the rationale and why we're doing this at all. So first off, we have the basic wire format. The main takeaway from IETF was like, hey, I can actually use this. Like, cool, nice concepts, but I need interop. We clarified the object model a little bit to just kind of explain why we're doing things, what the different pieces of the protocol are. And then I did a try at how you actually choose what media is published and consumed. But we'll start with the basic wire format.
Yeah, so basic wire format is will be very familiar to pretty much anyone in this room. Is tag length value frames in our C9000 format. It's almost exactly the same format as HTTP Free uses. We introduced the handshake, which is called the setup frame, and the setup frame is very similar to some sense to how TLS1 free works. Is you start by offering all protocol versions on client, and then the server picks one, and then there are a bunch of extensions that can be used, and one of them is the only one that the standards currently defines as the role, and that one is effectively you not even negotiate, but you agree on whether you're doing ingestion delivery or something else. You agree on who gets to send media and who gets to subscribe. So that was the first PR. Next PR is a bit more involved and is still very much a works in progress, especially the namings. The names are all very much subject to change. It's the object model, or in other words, what are the basic units on which WARP operates, And we had a long discussion, and this is like the very basic model, is that there are so far 3 entities, which are called tentatively broadcast, track, and object. And they're presented on slide in kind of hierarchical, is that broadcast consists of tracks and tracks consist of objects. So broadcast is kind of the top level entity. It's the things that you connect to or you ingest or you deliver, and it has a global name, which is a URN. That is the basic purpose of the broadcast, is that everything lives in broadcast. In particular, tracks live in broadcast. So what are tracks? Tracks they have multiple purposes. The number one purpose of a track is it is the unit to which you can subscribe. That is to say, you can have a video track and you can have audio track in English and then in French, and you can only subscribe to one of them. And the second purpose is that it is the top level concept on which we define the media format agility. That is to say, each track has a format associated with it, and I'll go a bit later on what exactly this means, but tracks have an init segment, which is the thing that is you always have, that is required to decode anything in the track, and then the tracks have objects, and objects is the minimal unit. Can be a GOP or a frame depending on your latency settings, and they currently have an ID and a delivery order within the track, and they could potentially have timestamps associated with it. It's currently TBD. The draft doesn't actually spell out anything regarding timestamps, but for instance, if you're using CMAF, it would be like similar to HLS Chunk, where you have where you have the data and then you in every object. So track formats more specifically, whenever you define a format, and the only format defined in track in the work draft currently is FMP4, you have to define 2 things. One, you have to define the init segment, and the init segment is, for example, the movie box in MP4, and that is always available when you're subscribed to the track. And then it has to define what is it, how do you actually decode, init segment is in particular. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if you move back there, you started defining the media as a URI, and then as a URN, which is basically naming the object. Do you hear me? Yes. And then you have the track as a transport version of the object, something that we'll look at. Those 2 concepts definitely exist. What I'm a bit worried about is that there are implementation scenarios in which the track is something else than just an encoding. Take the example of having a network in which there is a translator box. And so you have a video which is happening in Chinese, and out of the translator box, you have the same video, but with subtitles in English. Is that a track?
Yeah, there would be separate tracks.
Yeah.
Like the idea is a broadcast is.
No, I mean, are these 2 tracks of the same URN, or are these different URNs?
Well, they'd have different track IDs, but they'd be part of the same broadcast URN.
Yet it has implication, especially if you are driving your URN also to find where that thing is, because one track originates from the original publisher, and the other track originates from the translator, which will be at a different location in the network altogether.
So I believe from the perspective of the consumer, this is opaque, as in the URN at that stage identifies.
Victor, I understand that we have consumers, but we are defining a protocol, and those concepts stream down in the protocol. So there are different issues there. The consumer is probably not going to invent track ID by itself. It's probably using a client that says, hey, I have those options, which one do I pick? But there is a relation there between naming and how we use it in the protocol, which is tricky. So I'd like that we at least acknowledge that there is a complexity there, and that, for example, I may also have a translator from MP4 into AV1 because of whatever compatibility issues and all that. So I think that the unit at which MOQ works ought to be the track, not the broadcast URI.
Regardless of the broadcast URI, the idea behind the broadcast is to say that these tracks have a same timestamp. They have a same delivery order. Like if you try to say, deliver with priority 500, that's only in relation to the other objects within the same broadcast.
So I think that's the one thing that should be explained very clearly in the data model, which is not today. I understand the value of saying, hey, I will have different representation of the same URN, and there are aligns, or there are synchronization points inside the track that I can use to switch from one to the other, and it's not jarring when I do that. But we have to be very explicit there, and it is not today, it's not tied.
Yeah, but at least the thought is that you could have a quick session or a quick connection with multiple broadcasts on it. And you need to be very clear that if you're doing anything track specific, it is scoped to a broadcast. It is not a global thing. It's very much like, again, the timestamp, if you're seeking, that is specific to a broadcast. Is at least the idea.
Well, no. No. I mean, I'll give you two scenarios. One scenario was my translation there. They come from different boxes, so they're accessed by different quick connections.
Are you, in your translation box, do you receive translation from a completely different source by different connection?
No, but maybe you apply some artificial intelligence of what have you. You take the original stream and you change it so it is now in English instead of Chinese. That's one example, okay?
Yes, but
we want to be specific there, because there are cases, if your translation goes through a different box, in which the quick connection that you will use is not the same as the quick connection you will use for the original media. And so what is tied to a connection and what is not should be specified. The other similar issue, much closer to home for us, doing these quicker prototypes is, okay, I have relays, and I am a mobile system, and and I know that now I should be continuing my connection with a different relay. I mean, I was using the relay in Seattle, but now I want to use the relay in Portland because I've moved. When I do that, I need to be able to stitch the two things together. And I need the kind of synchronization points that you envisage, but they're not on the same connection. It's a different relay.
I mean, that's the point of the broadcast, is you could deliver the same broadcast over different connections, and they share that sync point.
So, I mean, basically, in order to understand the data model, I'd like to understand what it does in scenarios like the one I described there.
I guess maybe to rephrase it, what's wrong, at least with this? Because I can see through your Chinese language, your translation service, you're probably going to need a lookup table. You're going to need to know that you've got 2 feeds coming in to a single box that merges them into one connection. You're going to need some way of knowing that they came from different sources. And I don't necessarily think it needs to be in the object model.
I guess from my perspective, the URN as a broadcast identifier identifies what you want to receive when you from the whoever you're subscribing to.
Yeah.
And that name is
but
not
it's
hop to hop.
Yeah, it's a per hop property.
It's a hop.
The problem is that not everything is a broadcast to start with. Okay, so I mean, it's multicast. And then take even the case of, suppose that I have a box that takes an HD video and transform it in low def.
So Christian, there are a couple of other people in queue, so I realize you have
I'm too long. I
ongoing issues about this, but the whole afternoon is about this. We may return to this, but I'm going to ask you to wind up so we can have the others. Okay?
Yeah, so basically clarify those scenarios. I can work on that if you want. But it's
okay. Roberto, you're next in queue.
So I wanted to ask a fun question here, which is, let's say I was doing VR and I wanted to make this kind of stuff work for VR, like it to have utility for VR. And one of the things that's probably important is that I have different levels of detail that I can express for an object. It seems like this mostly gets there for addressing those kinds of things. And I was curious if you could address that.
Well, it's similar to ABR for video. You have multiple tracks of different quality, and since track is a unit of subscription, you effectively subscribe to tracks of the desired quality.
Yeah, more or less track is just the codec bit stream from start to end, and it's broken up into objects or fragments of that bit stream. But track is the same thing as codec bit stream, more or less.
Right. And the other question I had was, how do we expect to handle discontinuities with this object model?
The current answer is you define a new track which is a successor to the previous track. It's not entirely written down, but that's like the simplest way is like since you're having a new init segment, this is how you handle discontinuity. It's just you add a new track and say this is instead of the old track.
Okay. I don't think it needs another init segment, but we can discuss.
I guess it depends on what kind of specific
I think it depends as well. I don't know how existing containers usually handle discontinuities because I don't think they usually do. Like if you have MP4, you can't. I don't think you can just suddenly say the timestamp resets halfway through a file.
It just
I think
skips.
it really gets down to what are you trying to do with the discontinuity, and is there a different way we could do that? We could have a message to say like a track reset or something, which is basically just the init segment again, or start at timestamp 0 again.
Right. So the reason I'm asking this is because there's actually a trinary state here that we kind of forget about sometimes. There's the data exists and I have it. The data exists and I don't have it, right? And the data doesn't exist, right? And we need to be able to figure these things out separately. Otherwise, it becomes very difficult to actually do streaming properly. Because, I shouldn't wait forever on data that will never exist because it was never ever produced or will never be produced. And I think that's kind of the thing that having a high-level concept of a discontinuity one way or another is important to encode, because maybe my camera didn't produce data between time t and t plus n.
To answer that, I think the purpose, at least, of the objects is that they are lossy. Like you might not get an object, so it handles discontinuities by just. I guess what I'm trying to say is, if an object is dropped on the network, how is it different than it being dropped by the encoder? And the answer is it's not really. They should be able to be handled independently.
But there are. Anyway, I can take this offline.
Yeah, I believe IDs are currently continuous, which means you would have a discontinuity in time domain, but not in the ID domain.
You could do that. I think right now they're actually not continuous, but whatever. They have to be unique.
Raji?
Okay, so my question was more on kind of following on to what Christine was talking about, where you have an initial publisher, okay, who's publishing a certain track that's part of the broadcast. You have some intermediaries that are, you know, operating and generating additional stuff. Say, for example, I'm generating subtitles on the fly, okay, and they're now getting effectively injected in as an additional track. I have a new sub-track that's getting added. And I may be doing this at different points. So my broadcast may be happening, say, from Europe, but I'm doing, you know, a Hindi subtitle at my relay end in India, for example. Okay, so whereas the same broadcast is also going to the US, and my local relay in the US market is doing the Spanish subtitles. Okay, do we see a scenario where you actually start breaking out and regenerating it as a new broadcast being exposed to downstream subscribers at the relay end? Or are you kind of thinking of a scenario where we keep the same broadcast and subscribers pull different tracks from different locations?
I think the answer to that is the broadcasts are essentially hop by hop. So it's effectively the same, it's effectively a new broadcast whenever it gets relayed. It's like kind of like HTTP proxy. It's like you get a response from server, and you're free to do whatever you want with that response from server. You're free to compress or decompress, and a lot of CDNs will recompress it, or you're free to deliver it as is. But fundamentally, for every subscriber, the data, the broadcast they receive is the one they immediately asked from the relay they're connecting to.
Okay.
So there isn't this kind of like global notion of broadcast integrity.
So I think, again, that's probably something that needs to be clarified, because when you're putting it in a hierarchical structure like that, you know, it's very easy for the mind to go to say, okay, the broadcast is probably something that's overarching across the entire lifetime, or the visibility of the asset across different locations and different delivery paths, more importantly.
Yeah, we'll discuss later in more slides, but just figuring out this URN, if it's like on a per connection basis or if it's global. For example, does everybody share the same broadcast URN?
Right.
Will they get the same content? You're right, sorry.
So Has, I had some clarification questions. We should definitely discuss about the globally unique or not, because the down path relays and how there's no connection concept that would be for the edge relay that kind of dissolves when the relays are interconnected, and we need to see what's the scope of the URN or URLs or whatever we call it as. And another clarification question I had is on if the object can be a GOP or object can be a single encoding, how do the endpoints know how to parse it? Are we signaling that somehow? That saying that this object as a GOP with sub-objects, or we're saying how do the endpoints even know to encode and also to receive?
There used to be a dependency number, which we, I think, at some point removed. There is definitely should be an open issue to objects can depend on each other. Some objects are, it's like keyframes. And if you have a GOP per object, all of your objects are effectively like independent, such as they're like keyframes. We don't currently.
We'll get to that, because I do have a slide bringing up like your proposed object model. You do need to know if it's independently decodable, although I think it gets harder with stuff like SVC and stuff like slices. Knowing what objects depend on what other objects is just
Right. So
a touchy subject.
Yeah, somewhere we need some kind of dependency being explicit or implicit. That's something we have to work on it. And second thing is that I think with Spencer raised on the topic about the containers and init segments, it's very specific to a container, and tracks specifying that to be part of it, we should kind of probably consider what does it mean to be part of the track definition, not. That's kind of open question at least from the last discussion. And and I want to kind of understand how does this map to multiple publishers. The broadcast is one publisher, fan out. In kind of interactive conference, you'll have multiple publishers. In that case, what does a track ID, like, is there somewhere we need to include the publisher ID or something that knows from this conference or this WARP media session or MOQ session, these are the different publishers, they have their own track IDs because it's not one publisher, multiple publishers.
That's a good question. I believe that the way you do multiple publishers is just when at the place where you merge publishers, you merge all of the tracks.
No, we don't merge, right? We don't. That's one way to do, but that's not. That'll work if this is the model we pass. But I'm not saying we have to solve it now. We need to kind of.
I don't think the network cares is the answer. I think the application can decide how to overlay multiple broadcasts.
Yeah, there is definitely. Yeah, there is definitely. It is to some extent. I'm not sure this is entirely something that matters for anyone that's other than the end application, because the notion of multiple publishers and in general the notion of for a particular track what does the track mean is to some extent application specific.
True, but relays do have to act on behalf of the application. I'm not saying it does not solve, but we have to think about it from all the entities. And the last question is like on the point on entities compressing or decompressing in between. I think one of the requirements of the MOQ was it can be end-to-end encrypted. You cannot have something in between compress and decompress unless it becomes an end from the encryption perspective. In that case, it will become its own publisher. Probably we need to make it clear in those cases that that's what it is.
Well, the way it currently works with something like HLS is you can end-to-end encrypt, but that end-to-end encryption happens on container layer. That is to say, it can be, and if we say that we have to support end-to-end encryption, there are also scenarios where we would not want to end-to-end encryption because the encryption already happens on the quick layer and you're transmitting from one endpoint to another. Live ingestion is a good example.
So yeah.
So I'm just going to once again point out that we have a lot of people in queue. With this is
we have a lot more slides as well.
Yeah, I'm just want to be. So we have Jonathan, Kirill, and Jordy in queue now, and then I'm going to suggest I'm not going to formally lock the queue, but that we kind of pause and go on a slide or two and maybe restart. Jonathan.
Yeah, Jonathan Lennox. So I asked this in the chat, but of course you guys aren't looking at the chat, so I figured I'd actually ask it. If you were, say, gatewaying a WebRTC conference to a video conference to this protocol, would you expect that would be a single broadcast with tracks for each, with separate audio and video tracks for each participant, or would there be a broadcast per participant?
I think it would be a broadcast per participant, especially when you look at the number space. Like, would different participants use the same PTS, presentation timestamp? Like, no, they start at different times. Would they use the same delivery order to say this segment is, or this object is more important than this one? No, they weren't coordinating that at all. So yeah, I would conceptually think of a broadcast being, each participant, and then there can be a higher level compositing, layer almost that says how the broadcasts are either on the screen or maybe you couldn't have a server that composites it into a single broadcast, but I would treat it as separate.
Okay, so you'd expect, like, for instance, each broadcast would have a single synchronization domain of across its media.
Yeah, it might get weird if you try to synchronize multiple broadcasts.
Yeah.
But I think that is compositing. That would make it almost like an encoding step to make it a single broadcast.
Yeah. So that doesn't, I'll let you. I mean, Peter pointed out in the chat that doesn't let you do things like the top end audio semantic you usually do for video conferences, things like that, but without.
It's just hard because you need the clients to cooperate if they're going to share a broadcast, and I don't know how to do that.
Okay.
Yeah, for example, for audio, you can both, if it's a simple audio conferencing, you can either forward all audio tracks or you can mix them, and that would obviously impact how exactly it looks. So the answer is depends on what kind of a real time you're doing.
Okay, so Kirill, you're next.
I'll try to be quick. Quick comment on the last one.
It does sound like we may want to benefit from something like mock session at the top, but I don't know. It's getting complicated. I wanted to comment on like your guys' interaction about discontinuity. The current like HLS and Dash formats do support discontinuity. In HLS, it's like explicit discontinuity tag. In Dash, it's a period thing. So we do probably want to support something like that. I think just having a saying that like we're gonna have partial reliability, like saying like say some objects are not gonna be there. If we have a way to say it explicitly, we'll probably make the like transcoder lives easier. So
yeah, I don't think the discontinuities would change this object model. I think it's something like file an issue, brainstorm ideas how we can solve it.
Okay, I'll be super quick because it's I was about to ask more or less what Kirill said, but just adding one use case about discontinuities, targeted at insertion, server-side targeted at insertion. This is something that today it's happening, and today it's solved by discontinuities or multi-period. Perhaps, as Luke just said, perhaps we need to think about that use case.
Yeah. Like I personally, like I've implemented the server-side add insertion, and the discontinuities feels like a hack. I would have a track per each audio ad, for example, or each ad, so not audio, and just have some way of switching between the live content and the ad track.
But then you need that.
But we could do
mechanism.
discontinuities as a separate way. It just gets harder because we kind of abuse discontinuities. They're separate. They're technically different media bit streams, but we kind of hack the fact that the decoder will reset fully.
No, that solution that you just said sounds really good. But then we need that mechanism to force or to tell the players to switch. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you want them to see the ad. We know.
Okay, so we're paused on the thing for now. Can you guys please go on in the presentation for a little bit, and then we'll return to.
I think we're there. I guess this is where I take over. So part of, I don't know why this slide just kind of randomly came out of nowhere, but we've discussed this a little bit with the container discussion earlier. At least one of my goals is that we have this object model, and we try and decide what's the bare minimum that a relay needs, or at least the network stack needs to serve media. And then everything else we punt to the actual container format. So like anything that, like the SPS PPS or the resolution, like the relay doesn't need to know about this, so we put it actually into the container itself. So we have a very clear divide of things that the relay needs and the things that the decoder needs. And I think we're gonna have a lot of debates in the coming time of what those things are. Like presentation timestamp, does the relay need to know? Maybe, I think is the answer. For like seeking backwards, yes, it actually might. So we'll have to, on a case-by-case basis, figure out what needs to be in the actual network stack and what needs to be in the media stack.
Victor was saying before that encryption is just something you have from time to time. But for analysis of what Luke just said, encryption is a very powerful tool because you have to assume that the container itself is encrypted and the relay absolutely cannot look inside it.
Oh no, so that is one of the restrictions. You cannot, a relay or the network stack cannot look inside of a container. And then it's, okay, go for it, Victor.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is there other reasons the relay we don't want relay to look inside the container? Is the relay do not need to know the container format because it might not be something that relay supports.
Relay should not support FMP4, for example. They should not support CMAF.
Victor, you have not read all the IAB documents about use it and lose it, or everything that is in clear text will be eventually used by the relays. So. If you want the relay to not use something, it shall be encrypted, period.
But yeah, the general model I'm going on is put everything into the container, because that's what the decoder needs, and then pick and choose which things you also duplicate at the relay level, or just move to the relay level specifically.
To answer Christian's question, I worked on Chrome for many years. I know the pain of not encrypting things.
I would just like to add what Luke said is that we need to expose things to the relay that's required for relay to function as part of the MOQ transport. Anything other than that should not be exposed to relay. And the more we add, the more we have to answer at a later point in time, we'll remove it. So let's talk about what relay functionality we need from the MOQ and figure out what needs to go in the header. And you can add later. We have to discuss, make sure that it does not cause problems later.
Okay. Sorry, one other point there. I think I'm not positive it's true that when you say everything needs to go in the container, I mean, particularly like the dependency orders, presumably should be resolved before you recreate the container.
Well, the reference list is in the codec itself.
Well, yeah,
and
yeah,
it needs that, right?
Yeah, that. But that's not the same thing as like, this this frame depends on that frame. It's not the same thing as this. I mean, it's represented but differently. But I think there is another piece of the puzzle which you're not showing, which is different which is separate from relays and decoders, which is the receive side reassembly, which is, I think, not when you're going to need to necessarily look in the containers, because this is sort of recreating a single coherent container that you can feed to the decoder out of the various quick streams. And I think that uses a lot of the same information as the relays, but maybe not exactly the same. In particular, things like dependency orders, like, do I have everything I need here, or do I need to wait?
There might be a world where we could definitely duplicate. Like you could have, for example, the reference list in the codec, and at one point, I think in the previous draft, we also had dependency list in the actual network protocol.
Yeah.
That's removed for now, but in theory, like, I don't know what to do with that. I don't know.
I mean, I guess maybe there's just a, I think there's another piece of the, another role here, which is like the thing that's deciding what gets fed into the decoder, presumably before decryption, needs to have some information to make sure that's in their correct order.
It would have access to both, right? Because it would be able to read the contents of the quick stream and get the actual container itself.
But yeah, but I mean, I guess the point is things like therefore relay should not strip all the information they get. That should also.
Well, relay doesn't know if it's the final hop either,
that's
so
true,
it shouldn't strip anything.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, unless there's no more.
I had a cute question. It'll be quick. It was going back to your question about timestamps, and you said, should we teach relays about time because we want to seek? I would argue strongly no, because we can teach relays about time, but then if you're a VR solution and you want to shift your tile field 30 degrees to the left, now we have to teach relays how to shift 30 degrees to the left. And we start inventing all these different use cases, which are different ways of accessing cached content. Time is one of them. So I hope we can abstract away the notion of asking for different things. In other words, we create a class where it's a number and you can ask for something smaller than, equal to, or greater than it. It might be a timestamp or it might be fields of view, but we don't call it time, right? We just create a structure that allows a cache to generically retrieve that content.
If we don't call it timestamp, but it's actually a timestamp, is what you're trying to say?
Well, I don't want it only to be a timestamp because it might represent a very different number that's not hours, minutes, seconds, or epoch time.
I think it comes down to like generic players. Like if I have VLC and I want to seek backwards, I don't know about this generic field you just made. Do we support VLC seeking? If we do, we have to call it timestamp.
No, I'll whiteboard it later, but I believe we don't, and then we can make it more generic to suit different use cases.
Just to add that, I know we'll be talking about the PR that's been there, and that kind of provides a generic way to do that. We might decide not to go with that or not, but probably at that point we might discuss some of the options.
There's nobody in the queue.
Oh, nobody in the queue. Well, there wasn't anybody. They all just. Anyway, let's keep going. So I worked on the catalog and subscribe message. Very crude. It's basically PubSub, the most very basic PubSub. The idea is that a publisher has new tracks it wants to, and a new broadcast it wants to advertise. It sends a catalog, and then somebody receives and says, hey, I like that broadcast. I want this subset of tracks from it. and it's allowed to reissue subscribe messages to get different tracks. Like in the VR case, if you're looking more to the left, you'd issue a subscribe again, this time with the track that's meant to be to the left. So right now it's very crude. The idea is that the receiver will have to issue a subscribe every time it wants to change anything. I'd like to explore a world where you can give enough rules to the relay to say, hey, like, you know, but we have to get into that more. Right now it's just...
I also meant like kind of publishers say halfway through, say, oh, hey, a new track just came online.
Oh, I would like that too. Right now in the current draft, no. Once you just define a catalog, it's a broadcast. It cannot be updated, but we definitely need a way of adding and removing tracks, for sure, 100%. It has some complications there, but yeah.
So a non-chair question. Previously, you were talking about somebody and an application layer compositing together different broadcasts. And I think that actually suggests that you have this higher order thing that I think would be fine to call a composition. And that composition is made up of various emissions, which I think you're currently calling broadcasts. And I wonder if that's going to be the case, whether allowing a publisher to announce a composition, including the emissions and the tracks underneath it, handles the question that he was just asking pretty nicely. Because sometimes what's happening here isn't you're changing the emission to include a new track, you're actually including a new emission in the composition. And in many ways, I think that's a more natural way to approach this than trying to change the number of tracks in a broadcast as you go, because then you may have interdependencies among them that you're not handling, where if you say, hey, this emission, this new thing is part of the overall composition, and that can change, but that any individual emission within it is stable for the lifetime of the composition. I think that actually helps you.
And I think that is what I kind of propose for the ads as well. Like an ad would be an emission. Yeah. As opposed to a new track. Yeah. I think that's reasonable. I think there's certainly enough cases where you'd want to group them together. Yeah. Anyway, let's continue. So catalog is really basic. It's remember that broadcast URN. It's just saying here's what my ID is. Sorry about URI versus URL versus URN. This is just an ID to me. It's just meant to be unique within a session, a connection. Number of tracks we have and track descriptors. Each track descriptor is just an ID. I put a string here, but it's actually a var int right now. So long as it's unique within the connection. A container format to say, hey, from now on, my track is going to use FMP4. And then the container init, which is based on that format. Again, the relay does not read any of the data within container init. It's just it's an opaque payload for it. And in the case of FMP4, it's the init segment, the move, and the track atom.
Okay, so we currently have Roberto and Suhas in queue.
I'll do the next slide really quickly because it might answer it. So first thing, why is there no manifest? Maybe that was one of the questions. Initially, I made something like HLS dash, where you have like a text-based resolution equals, like, language equals. And then I realized FMP4, the init segment, already has all these things. It's the existing standard. We already need it to decode, to initialize the decoder. So at least in the current draft, it's just like, you know what? Let the container define all that stuff. The relay doesn't care. The relay doesn't need to know the resolution. Really, the only person that needs to know is the decoder, the end user, to pick which track to actually download or subscribe to. We'll probably have to do more than just rely on FMP4, like define, extend it, or define some other manifest format. But for right now, it's just the init segment has everything you need. And there's also the case of duplication, like what happens if the manifest says, I am this codec, but the actual media itself is a different codec. So.
You currently have 7 people in queue, so I don't think we can go past this slide without
okay,
draining.
we're going back.
As long as you get to the end of your complete thought before we...
That's it. That's the end of the thought.
Okay. So I'm going to just let Roberto, Suhas, Kirill, James, Cullen, Rajiv, and Christian know everybody else who's in line with you, and what you can probably anticipate what they're going to say. Please keep your comments as pointed as possible. It's already 3:15. Thanks.
Roberto Peon. It'd be nice if instead of a container format, it was a how to remux this into a container format thing. That would give a lot of flexibility for nicer things in the future. And completely separate, if we had an ad, as much as I hate them, and it was the same ad, would I have to send the bits again?
Currently, yes.
Yuck.
It is, the container init segment is like 700 bytes, but that is a problem both in overhead and also duplication. So we'll have to figure out a solution for that, maybe.
Just a clarification question. On the track ID, there might be a case where we might also want to give an example where that shows if I have a 3-camera system, each camera might have its own track. So should we basically say the track ID includes a representation that would include the source as well, or should we create a separate track ID for each of those source? Separate.
I think, well, I don't fully understand the question.
The question is that, like, the cases when you have the 3 cameras, for example, and I want to send information from all the 3 cameras, in that case, each will have multiple representations, like high quality, low quality, and medium quality. Would the track ID in this case will be 6 tracks you create, or 9 tracks you create, or it would be track ID should also have something to say, this is come from this source ID? Or
it would be 9 tracks because there are 9 things you can subscribe to. There are like 9 logical sequences. And then you can use a container init as a metadata to describe which is which.
But I think it's also valid if you made it like a composition where they were a separate broadcast per feed. Would also be fine. I think either one.
Carol.
Yeah, the time sync. I think the broadcast is really the same producer, I think, is the... if the producer's the exact same, then they can sync. If they're separate machines, then they probably need to be composition.
Carol Puginmeta. So one thing that you mentioned about not having a manifest because everything is in FMP4, I agree, but there's very simple use case, right? So I'm a player, I want to play the broadcast, I want to present a list of options in terms of like resolutions and codecs and and so on. I mean, like, I don't really want to look inside of the container for that. That's a little bit of this, like, I don't think it's limiting, but like, I don't like it's impossible, but it's like, it's
it means you don't need an HLS or dash parser. Now you only have FMP4.
You have to parse it anyways, and like, this is just like, you want to take a format and extract it into some other format when you still have to parse both.
I think it's fair. Yeah, I guess it's fair.
Can it come out of
no side conversations.
Sorry. So one thing that is not going to be in the container is this, like, basically like user-friendly description of what it is, right? So usually it's not in container. It's nobody puts it in container. You'll have the codec. You'll have SPS, PPS. You won't even have bitrate there, by the way. That's another thing.
Yeah, there's no bitrate. You're right. There's a lot of stuff missing. We either need to extend these containers, like either possibly add more FMP4 fields, make our own, like maybe a layer on top. But I don't think the relay needs to know about a lot of things.
Oh, no. I'm not saying it's relay. So I think besides relays, we have actual end user who needs to understand all of that.
Yeah, actually, I think you can put MP4 definitely allows you to put description, and it actually makes things nicer because if you do the thing that records the stream on data by just copying MP4, now that means that all of this kind of metadata is automatically preserved.
I agree, you probably can. I just don't think anybody does it today.
Yeah, I don't know. The same thing like...
I have a follow-up on that, but I'll wait for my turn.
Yeah, I would say like another one like field of view for VR. I don't know if it exists in MP4. It might. Or do we have to make something ourselves? Or is it up to the application? Don't know. But the relay shouldn't need to know about it.
Okay, so we currently got James, Cullen, Rajiv, Christian, and Ali.
Sorry, I didn't know whether you summoned me. I'm just going to shoot.
James, you're awfully quiet.
James, we can't hear you.
I'm terribly sorry. Am I a bit more audible now?
Yes.
Yeah. So what Carol said, I think you're going to, if you keep using the init container, you're going to keep hitting walls with data types and things you need to signal. Also, it's unclear how that's going to work with transmitting DRM, like SANC encrypted stuff. I'm not sure if that's going to work. But more importantly, think about the decoder at the other end. If you're just going to throw the container over, if the player is just going to throw the container over the fence, the container with the media over, and not bother to look at that stuff, then this complicates things a little bit with implementations that may work like that.
Yeah, I would rename container format to something like manifest format. And the idea is like, so long as we get the information somehow, I don't want to be beholden to a container, existing container. Absolutely.
Okay, Cullen, then Rajiv, Christian, and Ali. Cullen?
I think my question is pretty closely aligned to this, but to what everybody else was saying here, but I'm getting a little lost of what pieces of this information that might be in the FMP4 container would also be in the catalog. Like, before I even ever get a container, I have to know which one to ask for. And so I need some level of information from somewhere to get that. It just seems like we need something here.
So to explain that, the catalog sends them all. So basically you have a catalog of 4 tracks. You send 4 init segments all in one big message. So you have both the init segments already. You don't need to make a separate get. And they contain all the metadata you would have got from like a HLS dash playlist. So you kind of get both for free.
Okay. So look, I mean, I think at this stage of the working group, we should almost like the important thing to me is like, hey, what information flows at what point in time? And I like your answer to that. The how, you know, the which container you're delivering the drugs in, I might not quite exactly like here, but I think the point of like at that stage of time, you get this type of information that you need makes sense to me, but probably not quite delivered and probably not relying on the container to 100% do it. Probably, and partially that's because I'm thinking of much simpler containers that don't have all of this stuff, but deliberately by design for efficiency reasons. But I think that we need to sort of get this information somewhere early. So I think this is very much on the right track, and we might just be, you know, hitting the nuances of, you know, where we put the drugs.
And now Rajiv, who probably will give us a different metaphor for what we're doing here.
Hi. Okay, so I'm still a little concerned about the fact that there, at least the gut feel for me is that we are still gonna lose a significant amount of functionality by ditching the manifests. Okay. The one thing is obviously now if we're looking at say DRM'd, you know, container streams, effectively now I am going to have to parse, decrypt every init container just to get the set of information about all the streams in there, which I would have typically got from a single manifest as part of my workflow in the more traditional world, right? So it is something that's introducing a level of complexity at the decoder end, which may be perfectly fine for most you know, browser-based stuff. But when I'm starting to do this on more constrained hardware, you know, this might be something that I have to start worrying about. Okay, I have a reasonably large quality ladder. You know, me figuring out that I have 14 tiers in my quality ladder out of one manifest that I parse versus me parsing 14 init segments and getting all of that out may not be as direct, you know, replacement for a, you know, resource constrained device. Okay, and again, what Cullen mentioned about the fact that there may be other components like my subtitles or whatever other kinds of additional streams, or maybe a director's notes stream or something like that, which is not going to be in a container format which has a clean init mechanism. So which means we now have to have maybe a placeholder init mechanism for those kind of container formats that don't have what FMP4 brings. Right. So I think there's a lot of work we need to do before we you know, conclude that this is the approach to take.
Okay, I have Christian, Roberto, Will, and Carol. I'm actually going to close the queue there so that we can take a short break, give these guys a little rest from being up in the lights, and then we'll return after the end of this queue.
We could do that a bladder contest.
So, Christian, Roberto, Will, Carol, break, and then we'll come back.
So, I am looking at this specification from a relay development point of view, and I am worried because I understand how subscribe to a track works. I subscribe to a track, and the relay says, hey, Victor wants to subscribe to that track. Is he allowed to? And I have a mechanism to forward the subscribe to some authorization center that says, can Victor see that really? And answer will then be yes or no, and it goes in the subscribe. So there is an authentication authorization mechanism. In this catalog thing, you are blasting bunch of available tracks to whom? Everybody?
So if I was a relay that conditionally wanted to advertise tracks, I would make a different catalog per user. As in, I would send this catalog for all 4 to
But I don't want to do that.
Yeah, I guess.
And I also don't want to tell Victor that Suas has a Zoom session with Cullen. And so I don't, I mean, I'm sorry, but I think that you wanted to get rid of the manifest. I want to get rid of the catalog. Because the catalog, frankly, the propagation of information in the catalog does not have to follow the same path as the propagation of the information in the relay. And if I want to get the catalog of what tracks are available for, I mean, the football games available on ESPN or whatever, I mean, there's no reason to broadcast that to the guys who are not ESPN subscribers. At the same time, the ESPN subscribers can get that from the ESPN website. So I really have a lot of mixed feeling there.
I don't understand that concern, but the catalog is a manifest. It's just a different encoding. But it's effectively the same as an HLS manifest. Yep. The only difference is the init segment is actually in it as well.
And the other difference is that there are no like timestamps.
Yeah, it's effectively just a very bare bones manifest is all catalog is.
No, I mean, you're not giving me better feelings there. But
okay, so one of the things that we will do for sure is the catalog format. One of the available ones will be like HLS and Dash, for sure. This current draft just took the let's use FFmpeg init segments because they're easy approach, but we're definitely going to need to define a proper manifest format. I think there should be a really clear distinction there between container and manifest. Is currently missing.
Roberto.
So, you know, looking at the catalog, I ask myself the question, what's wrong with the manifest? Knowing that they are basically the same thing. But, and I think the problems that I've seen with the manifest is it sends too much information that's not useful. And at least in a number of implementations for some of our commonly used protocols, it really is really crap for live because it's not appendable. So I think the question, first of all, is how do we address these two annoyances with the pre-existing manifests out there? How do we make sure that we're not sending information that the client is unlikely to care about? Because if we do that, we make a Goldilocks problem, right? Where now it takes too long to start up the video and we're wasting bits because we're sending stuff that they don't care about. And then the other one is, how are we making sure that this is appendable, especially while we're doing the other thing? You don't have to answer right now. The other one I'll point out is one of the things that's surprisingly costly is when we are muxing stuff together and we only care to pick and choose parts of it, the I/O cost of these things ends up going a lot higher, like non-linearly higher, because they become separate transactions, at least in most implementations I've seen. It's a lot cheaper to shovel bits and encrypt bits and stuff like that than it is to handle different transactions in most things I've seen, like practically. So I'm really curious as to, well, basically this is going back to my comment about remixing. If we can say how things are remuxed together in ways that present the data model on the client or the relay or whatever that we care about, then we end up being able to send it in different ways that can be far cheaper. So we could send it such that the metadata is all at once, because that's a lot more likely to be looked at, or the data and the metadata is muxed together because that's more likely when we're actually playing a particular track. Thanks.
Drive Cube. Yeah, the good news going back, there is a box for peak bitrate and average bitrate because we used it for the Dash ingest spec, so you can get that in. But the bad news is I'm yet another voice saying that I don't think the use of inits for catalog is going to be long-term sustainable. I think it works now with the common set of constraints, but very quickly we're going to find items that are not in there, and then going back to ISO and adding boxes is just a complex way. I want to innovate very quickly on something, and I think the solution, and I filed a PR for this, is simply have one payload for the catalog, which is some type of manifest. We call it a catalog so we don't overload Dash, right? But it's a JSON or some other thing we like. It's as minimalist as possible per Roberta. We're not sending information we don't need, but we are sending the information we do need to the client. And it's just a more flexible platform, I think, that won't work ourselves into a corner as quickly as putting everything into the init segment.
Yeah, I think it really comes down to which standards group do you want to push things down. Like, should this group be responsible for like field of vision for VR, or is it something that you can find another group to?
Exactly, we wouldn't have to. Don't pick your favorite, right? Just say, I create a standard where there's a catalog that gets sent, and the job of the catalog is provide subscription information to the client. Different formats are going to have different ways and means of specifying subscriptions, and you can be very flexible in how you specify those without having to modify the core base protocol in its communication.
Yeah, but that's why we support multiple container formats. The idea is you can just punt it off to some other specification. So, yeah.
Carol.
I think I like what Will said. I think we maybe need our own spec for catalog. And I do think, as you said, catalog is a manifest, so we can call it whatever. The one thing I want to make sure that whatever we do and use, we're still able to start consuming the data with just one RTT, and we don't need to do a bunch of round trips, and we don't need to refresh the thing all the time as well. But I do think, like, it sounds like, because if you say that like, in order for me to actually get all my information, I figure out what I need to subscribe to, I need to get catalog and then look into the init segment. Like, then another container that we're gonna, like, someone wants to introduce, there may not have that information in their container, for example. And so, like, I think it would be better for us to define the, like, what needs for what would we need for subscription.
Yeah, so long as it has everything, because I think my main complaint right now with HLS Dash is it doesn't have like SPS PPS. You can't initialize the decoder.
Right. Oh, yeah. Like, so first of all, yes. So, like, yes, it's, again, it goes to one round trip, right? So you can actually have in Dash manifest in its segments, you just like shove it into some XML attribute and call it a day. But yeah, that goes to that point. But I do not want, like, I do not think we should copy necessarily Dash or HLS. We just need to figure out what we need, call it catalog, and be done with it.
Okay, we're going to take a little break here. These guys have been standing up here in interaction mode for a while. It is 35 after the hour. We will take a 15-minute break and return at 10 minutes to, or 50 after the hour. And I want, when we come back, for us to kind of focus a little bit higher level here, right? Because we've talked about this in a couple of different layers of, like, very detailed or very high. Ask yourself what information needs to be consumed by which party at which times. And early on, Luke said something I think very important, which is we're trying to distinguish with the difference between what the endpoint that's going to render this needs and what a relay needs. What does the network need? What does the endpoint need? And we dove up and down in ways that I think we're sometimes losing track of that basic question, and that we can always go back and say, okay, we've decided that the endpoint is the only one who gets this, and they need it early. Now let's figure out how. It's always easier, and I will point out that this is a great example of the old saw, that the way to get the truth on the internet is to post something wrong and let people tell you the right way to do it. So it's always hard to be the document authors at this early point, because that particular law is hitting you pretty hard. So thanks, guys, for being good-spirited about that. And for the rest of us, when we come back, try and up-level a little bit and think not necessarily about whether this is, the right init format or the right thing, but are we getting the right information to the right people at the right point in the protocol interaction? And then we can go back and decide whether it's a composition and an emission or a broadcast and a track or a catalog or no. The bike sheds will always be there. We got time. But if we can up-level a little bit, then I think we've got a better chance that when we get to Yokohama, we're in a shape to say, yep, this is getting the right bits to the right people at the right time, and it's not taking the bits to the wrong people. And that's really what we need to have next. So take a little break, come back, and we'll see you soon.
My best friend, I never had him. He's disappearing off a ledge. I guess he left the way he came in. Made out of peppermint, all that in red pins. Pins and needles on my tongue. That's not exactly what I wanted. Poured into my cup, it's something you whipped up from the skins of tubes and flowers. I've forgotten all the things of. And on the next day, I woke up with brand new days. I still don't know what it was, but I remember how it tasted. I'm holding you on my tongue. You like your shirts with short collars and small prints, and I like walking home so drunk I can't remember what the name is. God, you're so quiet, so brave and so kind. And if you keep talking like that, then I might walk home with you all night. I'm holding you on my
brace yourself for the windbreakers, and brace yourself for the oath takers, and brace yourself, because time is as cold as ice. Save yourself by bailing water and crave someone else till your eyes are softer, and save yourself, because life is as short as tonight. And the bricks are red at 49th Street, and their heads they turn at breakneck speeds, but you'll up and take that train and leave if I don't save you soon. Hold the line, and theirs will falter. Make up your mind, and the trail gets harder, and make more time, because the highways are smooth as flight. Oh, sometimes, and the bricks are red at 49th Street, and their heads they turn at breakneck speeds, but you'll up and take that train and leave if I don't save you soon. If I don't save you soon.
Would you come on and go with me? Would you come on over to my place? Would you come on and go with me? Would you come on over to my place? Yeah. I don't feel like being lonely tonight. You see, I want some company. And you look like you're just my type. See, you're the kind whose spirits are running free. Let's take a sip of some cocoa wine and dance to the music nice and slow. And you won't be under any kind of pressure. You see, we'll just let the evening flow. So come on and go with me. Would you come on over to my place? Would you do that, baby? Come on and go with me. Would you come on over to my place? Well, and you look like you're just bored to death. And you want to get away. You want to get away from the noise and the crowd. Let's go somewhere where it's nice and quiet, where there's nobody else, where there's nobody else around. Let's sit down by a cozy lit fire, and we can be each other's company. Now, how does that sound to you? You see, 'cause it sounds so good. It sounds so damn good to me. So come on, would you come on over to my place? Would you do that, baby? Come on and go with me. That's right. Come on over to my place. How does that idea sound to you?
Hi, folks. It's probably time to wend your way back to your seat, or if you're sitting and we're supposed to be up in the front of the room, wend your way back up to the front of the room. All right, and now I'm going to unlock the queue and see who immediately leaps in.
Only 30 seconds will it be unlocked, then we're locking it again.
So you're basically incentivizing us to hit the queue button first and think of the question.
I don't know if you've noticed it, but we can actually also eject you from the queue. So if we see people join in the queue when there is no active discussion, we'll just assume that your finger slipped, and we'll help you out by removing you from the queue. In the meantime, gentlemen, would you take us through, say, another at least 2 slides and see how we go?
Hello, we're back. Okay, we're down with 2 slides. We did it. Let's go back. So we have this catalog. It's manifest, whatever you want to call it, same thing. And now the consumer needs to say, hey, I want these tracks, or this track. So it sends a subscribe message. This is the broadcast, the number of tracks I want, and here are the IDs for the tracks I want. We'll have to talk about what else it needs to send. Like if we're doing seeking backwards, we probably need some way of specifying you want something back in time, but currently not specified. And then unsubscribe is just send the same message, but with a track count of 0. So you can just kind of constantly send new subscriptions, and it overrides the previous one. That's kind of part of the benefit of having a broadcast ID is, yeah, it unsets previous ones. And then finally, because nobody joined the queue quickly enough, we're at object. So an object it's a bunch of IDs. It's got the broadcast it's part of, it's got the track it's part of, it's got its own object ID. I don't think we need it yet, but it's in there. Think of it like a sequence number object ID. We've got delivery order. This is just for prioritization. We could have timestamp, currently not specified, but it is something that the relay might need to know about. And then the container payload. This is depending on the format that was advertised earlier in the manifest, in the catalog. In the case of MP4, this is a MOOF and MDAT. This is a fragmented payload. So that contains the timestamp, PTS, DTS, anything in the codec bitstream. Relay probably doesn't need to know about any of that. Well, it does not need to know about any of that. It cannot read this. It could be encrypted.
So you do have a question now from Christian.
Yeah, I mean, I presented this morning what we did in the prototype. And the two main difference is that first, instead of subscribing to several tracks at the same time, we subscribe to one track at a time, and we assign, basically we open a control stream and we put a subscribe in that control stream. The value of that is that you have a state that is established in the relay that says, I have this control stream established. And that allows you to, as long as you have the control stream established, keep the other state. By opposition to, if you do, of course you could do subscribe and then unsubscribe, which will be equivalent to closing the control stream, but that requires the relay then to have this additional catalog which is not based on, I mean, basically the relay has to maintain a table of who's subscribed to what, and if I did not receive an unsubscribe, is it because nothing was sent, or is it because I missed it, etc. So the control stream enables some kind of fetch sharing between the connection and the subscribe, and that's why we liked it.
Yeah, I don't really think there's any conceptual difference between closing a stream and sending another message. Either one works. I think that's just.
And the other thing, the other difference is that in the object, we have two differences in the formats, if you have looked at it. One difference is that we do not send the whole damn URI in every object.
I agree.
Basically, in the subscribe, you negotiate a media ID and you send that in the object.
We can make either like a connection local broadcast ID or even connection local track ID.
Or you can make something. If you do have a control stream, you can put the stream ID of the control stream there.
Yeah, I think
that gives you a number space that is not just guaranteed to be unique in the connection, etc., which is nice too.
That is true. That is a familiar design.
Yeah. So that's one thing. And the other difference is that instead of the delivery order, we have effectively a drop priority.
Delivery order and priority are effectively the same thing, just reversed. I could use opinions.
I don't understand. Okay, explain me how.
Well, the idea with priority, for me, it's a very overloaded term. Like, I don't know what priority high versus low is because it's vague. Delivery order is meant to be deliver the lowest one first. It's meant to be a strict prioritization scheme, but it's naming. It's the same thing. Just please deliver this object before this object.
Yeah, and that's why I would like to call it drop priority. But I think we have exactly the same concept then.
Yeah, it's like, for example, H3 priorities has a number from 1 to 8. I don't know what those numbers are, if they're strict priorities or not. I wanted to be very clear this is a strict priority.
Okay, in queue we have Roberto and Suhas.
Roberto Payon. What if we just HPAC'd this stuff?
It looks a lot like HTTP.
Yeah, and
but
then,
that
and
was
then these URLs would go really tiny,
That
right?
was an older version of Warp as well, where we literally just had these are headers, and then I decided, what if we use QPAC?
Yeah. Can we do that again?
That's effectively what we're doing. I mean, we don't want to send the broadcast URN on every object. That's clear. We would have to avoid doing that. We'd need something per connection based.
Yeah.
Which would be like a QPAC table. Yep. This mostly comes from a request from like QuickR and Will specifically about what if we could deliver the same object message to every single viewer, so we could just easily mem copy them. If you start doing per session, per quick connection IDs, then now you have to like modify those values and remarshal. But I don't think that's a big deal. There's an issue on it. Yeah.
Thank you.
On the subscription, I know we are doing at the track ID level. Would it be possible if you also allow subscription at the broadcast URI level?
You mean subscribe to all tracks within broadcast?
Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, you'd save a few bytes because you don't have to enumerate all the tracks in this message.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, those are variants, so it's not
Sure.
a whole lot.
The other reason is also like if between the relays, if you don't want to subscribe to every possible thing, you can subscribe to the URN space and you'll get everything pushed to that one. And I also agree if you can, as part of the control stream or something, you convert this URN to something small would be useful. And it's local to that connection.
Yeah, it used to be a variant, the broadcast ID. You do need a lookup table, right? You will need a way of seeing this broadcast ID is this URN from the catalog.
Colin.
I just want to jump back to the priority thing. I agree with the strict priority thing. How many bits are you imagining that being in rough order here? Because I sometimes feel like people have very different views of what priority is. And I'm trying to just pick down semantically what we need here.
So the way that Warp works in production today is the priority is actually just the presentation timestamp. The idea being is send me the newest object first. Again, we have an object per GOP, so that works. It doesn't work when you do an object per frame, but it's a varant. It's a uint62 currently. We may need to rethink priorities. Maybe we need something more sophisticated than that, but we wanted to start with a very simple scheme, send the higher priority thing first.
Right. So look, I can imagine that working. I could easily live with that. I also see people imagining more like a 3-bit or 7-bit priority or something like something way too small for you. And I get how variant just sort of allows us to avoid this issue too, as long as it's strict priority. So I'm sort of in favor of that, but I think that's the level of thing that we should be trying to nail down now versus whether we encode it in like QPAC or not. I care less right now. But if we can come to some agreement, I can live with either of those answers. I think that'd be the type of stuff that might be sort of getting swept under the rug here that might be important to nail down.
Lucas and I have gone back quite a bit about that because you could do Warp with the 8 levels. You just need a way of reprioritizing, and it really only lets you do 8 GOPs at a time. And you need a message to say, like, this object is now this delivery order, which I don't like. I would prefer if you just had a giant int space.
Well, two problems there, if I may. Yeah, I mean, there are 2 issues with this design of giant number space. Is that first, you may want to define a giant number space here, but you are mapping into the quick implementation, and the quick implementation is kind of using the HTTP3, HTTP2 set of priorities, of which there are 7 or 8, depending on your count. So you're going to have to map that to the 7 or 8 number space.
That's not a standardized quick API necessarily.
I know it is not. I know it is not, but it's widely implemented. Okay. So that's one thing.
I mean, I know Quiche, for example, the Rust one takes much bigger int. It just only uses 1 through 8. The application only uses 1 through 8.
And another point has the only standardized APIs that is web transport. As far as I remember, we standardized on the uint32 priorities. Well, is this correct?
I think it was punted actually.
It's plus 32 minus 32 with 0 is.
Yeah. The web transport API is probably the only standard quick API, and it requires you to have at least 32 bits.
We should have an explicit requirement on quick stacks to support that kind of stuff. Because, I mean, what I do right now is that I reprioritize. I drop the priority of the old streams. So,
I mean, if the quick stack doesn't support this much of a number space, it's just going to do a worse job prioritizing. I think it's still going to do better than round robin, though. Like even with your 8 number space, you can probably still do better.
No, that actually works. Yes.
Yeah. So I think it's fine. It's just that your better Warp implementation or whatever will have a full priority number space.
Okay, so we have Lucas, Mo, and Jonathan in queue. And remember, not the bike sheds will be here with us forever.
So yeah, Luke and I have talked a bit about this, especially at the last IETF. I think we made a bit of progress. I wanted to write something up, but I've been busy doing other things. The HPIC priorities is extensible. It was always intended to be basic, and that you could add stuff, right? What we have is 8 buckets of things in a strict ascending order. So the lowest bucket is the most important. Anything in that gets served, but there's many things that could be. So for HTTP, what makes sense is an implicit ordering, that the things you ask for first are served first, and that's indicated by the stream ID because you use stream IDs in a kind of strict ordering. That doesn't really fit here, and it could just be easily augmented with an order parameter that you say, anything in the same bucket, if it's got this order, look at that first and then serve those things. And if there is no order, default to stream ID or something like that. That would be fairly trivial, I think, just to put into an existing implementation that Quick Layer is already doing. Like speaking to Quiche, the Cloudflare Quiche Rust. Yes, we have a slightly bigger number space. It's kind of, the reason for that isn't completely clear, but what it does do is allow us to kind of take operational freedoms. So yes, we're talking here about like requests and responses, but HB3 alone has other extra stuff it needs to do. It's got a control channel, it's got QPAC channels. Those things are probably critical to making the whole connection work, transparent to anything an application might think is important or not. So by having a slightly bigger space and doing transparent shifting around in that space, we still honor what the application asked for, but we still have our own flexibility to do what we want. I don't see that as an issue, particularly for this kind of thing. Like, yeah, you could have delivery order. I think it'd be easily done. I think it'd be useful to write this as a spec anyway, just to show an example of how to augment the scheme, even if that's not something we further go with. And I'll take a task to try and get that done before the next IETF, just so we have something to, people can tell me what I did wrong, as Tad just said. But in terms of the web transport world, yeah, we've picked an API design there for web transport, and we probably need to figure out a way to map the different concepts together. Again, I don't think it's impossible if we stick to integers, but yeah, it'll need some thought. But I want to stress that having this ordering concept is good, regardless of the name of it or exactly what it looks like. You're going to need this for any meaningful thing. And putting a mandate or some kind of requirement as a profile on top of Quick that it needs to support priorities like this, I think is fine. What Quick itself couldn't do is say anything outright. Similar with HTTP, the spec is very much like, here's how you could do it, but operationally, there's always going to be reasons the server's going to want to ignore you. The client can't DOS the server, like the server's always going to just have an escape valve. But for this kind of thing, a bit like the low latency HLS spec wanted to do, like trying to mandate this and coming up with ways that a client could detect if the priorities were working, or if the sender could detect if the priorities are working, or whoever. Adding that additional capability is completely fine, in my opinion. It just needs to be picked at the right layer of the stack.
I'm just going to jump in, and maybe if there's people in the queue who only want to talk about prioritization, I think that everyone agrees we're going to need to prioritize, and that it will take a little bit of time to work out the exact mechanics thereof, and that we can spend our time talking about other stuff that's like less low level right now. So if you're in the queue only to say something about priority, maybe just say in the chat, and we can keep going. And if not, Mo.
Well, I was going to talk about priorities, so I guess I'm not going to. But I'm going to put two quick points, and I'll make it brief. First is large integers versus a smaller space. You need to realize that the whole point of all these priorities is to queue things or drop them, and not at your layer. You're broken if you're queuing at your own layer. It's for the layer below you to handle things. So if Quick itself is queuing up a bunch of stuff, something is broken in BBR or in the application feedback for flow control. It should not be. It's what Quick pushes down to the OS sockets. And if the OS socket can't specify a priority that makes sense for its queuing disciplines or for its underlying network layers, then there's not much point in these priorities. So having a large integer space that has to get crushed down to very small, 8 or 4 levels of priority, that mapping is not going to work out very well. The second part is incrementing time as priority versus a absolute priority hierarchy are two very different things. And trying to have an incrementing time priority, I've never seen successful in any kind of scheme. So think hard about how you would actually tell a layer below you that your incrementing priorities based on time actually makes sense to it, and what happens at your wraparound intervals. So before we go designing it, someone should just take a quick look and see, has anything ever successful been deployed like that?
Okay, Jonathan?
Yeah, sort of higher level question about priority under delivery order. Is this scoped to the track or the broadcast?
This is to the, so this is scoped to the broadcast because you could have two different tracks, let's say 720p and 480p, that have different delivery orders. Simulcast, right? If you're sending multiple tracks, you can say, actually prefer this one during congestion.
Okay, and in particular, like audio versus video.
Yeah, audio versus video is the big one. So specifically in Warp, the priority of, we use the timestamp, but audio has a higher value by like 3 seconds. Just to say, I prefer 3 seconds of audio before any video. There's a lot of experimentation in this priority space. Like, I think it's really cool. It's something that we will definitely need firsthand experimental results of what priority values to use. Can we use a simple scheme like this, etc.
Okay, Will.
Okay, not a priority question. This is about broadcast URL. And I know in the past I've been asking for globally unique IDs in every segment because it makes the routing very simple. But I acknowledge the weight of it, especially for datagrams or audio samples, is meaningful. So I'm warming up to the idea that it's per session and we keep rewriting it at every hop. It's a lot of work for the relays, but we can make it work. But what we need to ensure is that that broadcast URL is globally deterministic. So with HTTP today, I take an address and any client can talk to any ISP and they will magically get the same binary object delivered to them no matter where it is in the world. We need the same level of determinism with our pub-sub architecture. And I think the only way to achieve that is to have a global registry of where this stuff comes from, and that's what domain names and DNS gives us. So I think we should look at leveraging that to a degree as a part of what MOQ does to ensure the global determinism of any addressing scheme that we generate.
I think we could talk about that later if we still have time, which we probably won't. But the big thing with that is I'm trying to figure out how, like, a broadcaster, some user manages to get something globally, like some scheme. But it's possible for sure.
Can I ask you a clarifying question?
Yeah.
When you say globally unique, do you need it to be unique for all time or unique for an epoch? Because there are two very different sets of requirements there. And in particular, if you mint an identifier the way you've done this, and use something like a domain name as part of it, it is valid for a period of time, the period of time that the owner of the domain name retains the validity, which tends to be quite good. But because domain names can be sold, they're considered inappropriate for URNs, which have to be unique over all time. So we have to be a bit cautious when we describe uniqueness, whether we're talking about it for some reasonable period of time, but we understand that just like links in the HTTP world, there can be bit rot, or whether we're talking about it for all time, which gives you a very different set of constraints.
Yep. Personally, I just want the broadcast ID to be unique for a quick connection or web transport session. I think we should have a discussion if it should be globally unique for all time, and what that even gives us. My answer is I don't think it gives us very much.
Okay, not as a clarifying question then, but also not about priorities. I think what Will was saying is he needs something slightly different. He doesn't need it to be scoped just to the session, but he also doesn't need it to be for all time. He needs it to be sufficiently unique that routing toward it gives the same resource or composition for all users of that at a particular time. And that's slightly different to either of the ones that we talked about before, but it is very much what the web does, right? And
it's pull based.
Yeah.
You have an origin.
Right, and so if we treat these as saying they're unique at the same level that HTTP URIs are unique, we know those can be reused, but we are trusting that the people who are creating these identifiers only do that when they have a good reason for it. Then I think we can actually reuse something like what you have there. We just have to be careful that we recognize what properties it does and doesn't give us.
I'll we're just going through as much as possible. There was a bunch of issues at the end for discussion, but we've discussed a lot of those already. So
Yeah, and we can do the issues tomorrow because we're planning on doing it.
there's no rush.
Is 15 minutes for agenda planning still what we think we're going to need? Okay, so then we have about half an hour left today, and there's still
Okay.
folks in the queue.
I have a clarifying question. We think of the track as a set of group of blocks and then objects. So objects group it in blocks so that we can group those objects of the same block into a single warp stream, etc. Where in that object description do I find the identification that this is the beginning of a block?
When you say block, do you mean like group of pictures or
Group, yes, group of.
So we need to. That is another slide as well for issues. Is figuring out mostly for when you join a broadcast, what does the relay send? It has to go back and send something older because it needs to have an iframe in it. There's currently no answer for that. There's a few different ideas. I think, like for example, the QuickR model to have a group as part of the data model is one way of doing that, but there are a lot of other ways too.
Sure. So basically, what you have here is work in progress, and we have to contribute. And
well, so yeah, it's a work in progress. This whole draft is a work in progress.
I get that. I get that because I mean, if I have to map that into the prototype we have, I'm kind of stuck.
So the way that it used to be in the previous thing is we had a list of dependency objects. So the idea is if you had a p-frame, it would literally say, I depend on object ID, whatever the iframe was. But we dropped that mostly because that having this full reference tree on object, it's too hard. We could do something like the group to say I'm an IDR, but then when you get into like SVC and you get into like per slice objects, it gets really messy to know what's decodable and what's not. Without
that's fine, but that means that in that case, I mean, there are two ways to do that, kind of in theory. One is to have a group ID and then an object ID in the block, or the other one is to have some kind of marker, saying this object belongs to, I mean, is the start of a group or not, or is something like that. But we need something.
Yeah, it assumes you have one dependency, but yeah.
No, I mean, warp design assumes that.
It's true, yeah.
So,
but I think we'll need something more complicated.
Roberto.
My interpretation of a requirement on unique is that it should be unique enough that we don't cache corrupt or cache poison. Is there something we need other than that, Will?
I think uniqueness for caching is... Yeah, the cache key is going to determine its uniqueness, and that's typically constructed of many attributes. The object ID, the broadcast URN, and not a literal concatenation, but a combination of those is going to drive the cache uniqueness. That's different from the determinism I spoke about previously. It could be non-deterministic, but still be fine in your cache.
Yeah, one of my goals is at least if the quick connection is severed, we don't just abandon the previous broadcast ID. You can make a brand new connection, a quick connection, and reuse that broadcast ID and recover. So to that sense, it is unique between connections. But yeah, I don't know how unique it is outside of that.
Well, in the relay case with one-to-many, I think there's the argument that it really doesn't want to be unique across those different ones potentially, because that becomes very inefficient. So I think if we can say what the problem is, then I think we can agree on the solution.
Oh my God, the queue's empty. Quick. Oh yeah, this is what we said before. Put everything object. We put all the data there, so you don't need a lookup table. But it sounds like we probably should have a lookup table. Message flow. I think this is Victor's section finally.
Yeah. So this is meant to be a very quick overview of how you establish a warp connection, which is first you need to establish a quick connection, which is HTTP free connections, and you need to establish a web transport session, which is using the connect request. Then you do handshake, which is how you negotiate the version of warp used. And then you need to exchange the catalog and then subscription, and then finally you send media. More specifically,
We'll get that next slide. I'll just do this for you.
this is a very simplified. This is how long it takes you to get to having a working web transport, but basically, HTTP free handshake and the TLS handshake and quick handshake are concurrent, and then you have the second round trip is you send the HTTP connect request. And that one is actually half of or 2 RTT, and the reason it says 1.5 RTT is that you can usually start sending data immediately after you send the HTTP extended connect. On the next slide, once you have a web transfer session, it depends on whether you do publish or subscribe. If you do publish, it's relatively simple. So this describes what happens right now is you exchange handshakes, that's another RTT. Then you send a catalog, and then the receiver subscribes, and we should probably remove the subscription for contribution because it's not necessary, but that's currently the way it works.
But before anybody joins the queue, this is meant to have too many RTTs, almost as a please optimize this.
Yeah, there is an issue to optimize the RTT count. This is like the simplest proposal, and also the charter says this has to run either over web transport or raw quick. If you run over raw quick, you will most likely skip the connect part.
You have a question from Cullen, and Suhas joined the queue while I was talking.
Can I finish the next slide because I only have one slide?
Okay, one more.
The next slide is the description of how this works in server publish, which is almost the same, except the catalog subscribe object is that role is reversed.
In both cases, it's currently 4 RTTs from a blank connection to actually getting the first object.
Yeah, Cone.
I think I'm lost on what your model for the catalog is. Like whether, if there's 2 publishers, whether they both publish their own catalog and somebody combines them, or how all that works.
Okay.
Most of the stuff basically makes sense, but the catalog part doesn't quite make sense.
Very simple explanation of catalog is catalog is just a bunch of description of individual track in its segments concatenated together. That's all it is.
It used to be called publish. So an easier explanation is it says that I want to publish something. This is what I am willing to publish.
Okay, so, but we're fine. Like I heard, Luke, I thought you had said earlier that once the catalog was published, it couldn't be changed. Something like, as long as it's like there's several people publishing and they've all published catalogs, and somehow the people receiving can choose between those catalogs somehow, or the catalogs get merged, or they're really just, you're really publishing catalog entries, not a catalog. I think we just need to refine this a little bit for the case where catalogs are not exactly are a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, and we will certainly have a way of modifying the catalog in the future. Just in the current draft, it was just easier to say it's a one-time thing.
There is, there was a very similar proposal in which catalog was actually like 5 different messages, each of which was describing individual track. And catalog is just a combination of those.
I think this a little bit confuses. I think in your use case, a catalog and capabilities are often the same. But as soon as you start talking about transcoders and things like this, the catalog and the capabilities of a publisher become a little bit different. Or at least the capabilities of a publisher are probably a subset of a catalog. I don't know. Yeah. I just think we need to dig down on all of this. I don't think it like that's. I just think we shouldn't take that part of it too seriously, quite, because we don't really have it. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's an HLS manifest. It has capabilities. These are the things you're allowed to download.
No, it's not an HLS manifest. It is quite different here when you're going to publish from sending directly an HLS manifest in many situations, right? An HLS manifest is a highly synthesized thing out of several publications. and has to do with the session as a whole, not what a single publisher's capabilities are. So I think that sort of oversimplifies it a little bit, and we just need to tease that apart. I don't know that it'll change what you're presenting here. We may manage to put all of that inside of a broad catalog object, but I'm just sort of highlighting, I think this is an area where we need to dig into more of figuring out what semantic information goes in these things at the different stage, and whether there's more than one thing, whether we have capabilities slightly different than a catalog. Maybe they're the same thing. Maybe we encompass both of them, but we certainly need to talk about how they get merged and distributed. And so, I think we should.
Yeah. In theory, setup could do capabilities as well, but you're right. Right now they're merged in catalog.
Yep.
So I have closed the queue just because it is now 4:24 and we already have quite a few people in the queue, and we have 15 minutes at the end to do agenda planning for things. So that doesn't mean we're through this topic, obviously, but I did want to let people know not to join the queue.
Yep. On the client publish, at least in the quicker model, is that if you're in the ingest the ingest or contribution scenario, you publish directly to the origin server, which would be the ingest server here. In that case, the ingest server need not have to do a subscribe, as the publish will basically go to the go to the origin server through the relays. So that way we can avoid having the subscribe coming from
so I actually want to make it really general, to actually generalize it even further. Depending on the use case, you might either the client or the server might or may not be in a mode where you either just start pushing media, this is published for instance, or you subscribe to something.
Right. So the catalog has to be authorized. Like you cannot just push anything. You send a catalog, and let's say you send AV1 hardware decoder or something, and which the server does not support, you have to reject it. There's no, so catalog sets up, what we call in Quicker is called a publish intent, saying that I want to publish these three things. Do you accept or not? And then it can publish. There's no explicit subscribe coming from the server on that side.
Yeah.
That's part of the problem with just pushing objects without knowing capabilities. I think to Cullen's point, you need to know capabilities before you can just blindly push things.
Right. We basically set up an advertisement which lists all the capabilities, and then you give a thumbs up. Then you can just start pushing towards that was solved to optimize the contribution scenarios.
Yeah, and a previous draft did that as well. This is again meant to be too simple, just so we get something on paper.
Kirill Pugin, Meta. Can you go to the next slide? I'm a little bit confused about server publish and
this is distribution, by the way. This is for viewers.
So it's who is viewer? Oh, so viewer on the left side.
The client is a browser on the left side.
Oh, okay.
They have to establish the web transport connection.
Okay, okay. Now it makes sense. Okay.
Yeah,
sorry.
and the current draft says that the client always sends the setup message on a bidirectional stream, which works out because it established the web transport connection. So yeah.
In the case of the client, is it okay to just send a subscribe without having received the catalog?
That is a nice optimization we should do in the future, for sure, where you pre-negotiate, the ID so you could subscribe in theory.
It's not even just that. Look at the model a CDN works today. You send an HTTP GET for a page that the local CDN node may or may not have in cache, and then that node gets it somehow. And why wouldn't it work just the same way?
I think that goes down to push versus pull. Like that is a pull if you're subscribing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's certainly an option. I think we could go into it. We currently push for latency, but I think pull is very attractive, especially for cache misses and getting older content.
Yeah, and then so basically that's the way our prototype works. I mean, the relays receive subscribe and they build a spanning tree that goes all the way to the source of the thing and gets it.
How about that? Oh, look at that. Okay. Weird. So I'm confused about so in this context, is the catalog specific to a single broadcast? So the connect target is telling me what broadcast I want from this server, and then the catalog will give me the track specific to that broadcast. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Specifically, like you put your point video player to a URL, and then it will tell you, here's a catalog, here's a video track, here's
like so for example, it's Sunday, I want to watch football, and then some out of band thing gives me a connect target for a specific game, and then in this thing, all I'm getting is all the different feeds I can get for that game, all the tracks for that game. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Oh, we're good. Wow. I wanted to quickly do this overview because everybody's favorite subject, relays. I think a visualization is needed for how this works with relays. So I crudely pulled this up. We've got a broadcaster on the left, and we've got some relays in the middle. I said twitch.tv because we've got an internal network. You won't see it. But the idea is as a broadcaster connects, the very first thing they do is send a catalog to say, hey, I've got English audio channel and video H.264 this bitrate. It sends it at least to the ingest point, and then that could propagate it forward to future relays, or it could keep it there, whatever. The catalog gets cached somewhere within the system. Eventually, a new viewer joins, and the relay sends the catalog to the viewer and say, hey, by the way, if you want to watch, these are the available options. What's interesting so far in this demo is, in theory, nobody's said subscribe yet, so the broadcaster hasn't sent anything. You probably want to have the broadcaster send something when nobody's viewing, but it depends. It's actually a nice save of bitrate. But if you're making a VOD, you'd probably, back in this step, want the relay to the very first one to send a subscribe to say, hey, start sending it to me now. But yeah, anyway, we get the subscribe from the viewer. That propagates through the relays back to the broadcaster, who will get that subscribe finally. And then it will start pushing objects, and the relay will know based on the subscription table when there's a fork in the road, which one to send it to. A new viewer joins. We're still sending objects as they get produced by the broadcaster. That new viewer will send a subscribe that goes to a relay, and it already had that subscribe in cache effectively. And then it will start forwarding those objects. There is a caveat where we do need a keyframe for this new viewer. At least with each stream as a GOP, you don't. That's one of the why I picked that design. But we do need to figure out how the relay knows that it should send A6 in this example was a keyframe, whereas A7 wasn't. You need some way of the relay to know that from that subscription or from the object itself. And then it continues, and you've got this one-to-end system. End-to-one is easier, but I just wanted to go over the hard and important case of one-to-end.
Okay, we have 2 questions, one from Will, one from Roberto, and I think then we're going to stop and start doing planning for tomorrow.
I think that's a good stopping point too.
Yeah, I think so. Will?
Yeah, so this relay architecture is nice because it's just Twitch, right? You're not having to deal with the fact that there could be, if I'm an edge-based relay on a CDN, I've got 1,000 different catalogs I might want to give to an end user. So I need more information. I can't blindly push a catalog without a request coming from the client as to which one they want. It has to be client initiated.
The Web Transport Connect would be that indication.
Okay, I agree with you on that. The second one is there's a schema where we can the publisher can push content out to all these nodes right up to the edge so that the moment the client connects, it's there waiting for it. That also becomes very expensive, but fiscally and performance bandwidth-wise, because you got a lot of edge servers. You might have 80,000 edge servers, but they're not, only clients are connected to only 50 of them, but you're pushing content out. And really the delay, the better architecture as I see it is the very first client to come to that edge makes the request upstream. If they're the only client in the world, then the content is only, it's pushed up the chain just to that client, and that chain expands to accommodate new requests. And all subsequent clients benefit from the first client coming.
Yeah, for sure. I would not design it this way because, like you said, not every host needs a catalog for every broadcast in the world. Like if you have one person watching, I don't need to send it to all 4,000 hosts in my fleet. So I would, in my video system, I would put the catalog probably some like ingest service, and then it doesn't even need to go through some way of knowing when it should be sent. That being said, it's really fast if it's on every edge.
Roberto Peon. It strikes me that we really need something completely separate for the policy side of this as compared to the protocol side of this. So for instance, if I wanted to talk to this relay and the next relay and the next relay and then to origin, like that's a problem that is very terribly solved with DNS. It just sucks for this. Especially if I need to differentiate between a viewer, say, in the US and a viewer in Europe. They probably aren't going to hit the same servers, I would hope, because that's probably a much longer RTT than they would otherwise need. Are we thinking about separating that out?
I don't really follow.
Okay. So if I am in Europe and I say, hey, I want to subscribe to this thing, right? Do we provide the information to say from whom I should be connecting for that subscription and from whom that person should or relay should subscribe, et cetera?
Yeah, so first off, to go back to Will's thing, I guess right now the reason the catalog is pushed everywhere is for discovery reasons. Like, if a new viewer joins, how do you know who owns that catalog? How do you know to fetch it? One way is just to push it preemptively. So that you do need to replace that discovery mechanism. As for discovering which relays you can connect to, I mean, that's hard in the first place, if that's your question. That's my job, pretty much. I don't think there's a standard for that.
Yeah, it's different. Okay. So am I hearing you agree that this is separate?
I think we might need a discovery mechanism to discover the origin of a broadcast. I don't want to commit to that, but I agree it is.
Isn't that specifically out of scope in the charter?
I think it is out of scope as well, because we're meant to be hop to hop, and you don't need discovery hop to hop. It depends, like how much we're standardizing in architecture versus a protocol.
So there's an efficiency problem that Will was rightfully addressing, which is, where do these connections end up? Where do these requests end up? And it will be hard to deliver on our promise of a low latency media streaming experience if we can't solve that.
I think for the case of interop, we care about hop to hop. I don't know how much we standardize versus let services figure it out themselves, like applications figure out who to connect to. I don't know if we want to specify you must issue a web transport connect to this host server, or just let the application figure it out.
Coolness.
So, thank you very much. You're not done. We'll see you again tomorrow. But I think you stopped in a place that's probably valuable for us to look at for a second before we dive into exactly what we want to do with the agenda. And that returns us to the question of what are we specifying? Many, many years ago, I worked at the SRI NIC, and the specification of who is said, you connect to the sri-nic.arpa host on this port and you issue the following thing. So actually written into the protocol document was the host that you connected to. And long after the protocol was turned down, that IP address was still getting tons of queries because it had been written down exactly what host you talked to. So we're not doing that anymore. So if you're worried about the level of generality, we're definitely not doing that. In fact, over time, my experience as an IETF participant is the IETF has more and more specified the building blocks and told you what the building blocks were good for. So there's systems engineering work that goes on in places like 3GPP that says, here's how you put them all together to get a system. And inside lovely companies like yours and yours, or whoever, you put them together into a system that works. And the level of interoperability that we require is that you should be able to use a box built by anybody who claims to support the protocol to build the system you're going to build. And I think part of what we're having a little bit of trouble in during this phase of the working group is all of us have different systems in our head. And we're going through that portion of building a working group process where we're going from the systems in our head to the abstractions we need to build everybody's systems. And so there's a generalization step that we're going through where we're saying, okay, those guys want to do it as a pull, and I want to do it as a push, and I have this latency requirement, which definitely means I need to push everything out to the edge as much as possible, and this person has a requirement for a very different scale of system, which means they cannot possibly push everything to the edge because the edge will overflow. And so our job as a working group at this stage, in some sense, is that generalization step. We look at all of the different systems people have in their heads. We look at the building blocks and we say, is there anything in this set of building blocks that means I can't build the systems people want to build? It doesn't mean we specify how to build all of them, because we would never be done. And it doesn't mean that we don't have to make trade-offs, because ultimately there are some things that we have to make trade-offs or to make the interoperability work. Now, during today's discussion, we've gotten a whole bunch of wonderful suggestions of things to do and stuff to continue talking about. But as we continue tomorrow, we have to kind of ask ourselves the question of whether we're talking at the right level for this moment in our working group. And as I run through the list, we have some of the things from the morning. The CWIN question, how do we expect to manage?
Do you want to let these guys sit down?
Yeah, sorry, you guys could sit down at any moment. You can stand too if you like. I know when I'm jet lagged, standing helps.
Do you want me to bring that doc up here?
No, because it is definitely not written for public. Okay. I can't spell, for those of you who don't know. You know, we have the CWIN question, the discussion of the API into web transport, and the set of things that are already marked as architectural in the issues list. All of those were on potential for tomorrow. We have the priorities question that has been hit on about 3 different times today already. We have questions on synchronization. The different use cases may need different types of things there. We have the negotiation of media forms. Where does it belong? At which layer? Container or transport or both? We have the configurable latency stuff, which I think maybe we could put off. We needed more detail on the difference between cache and replication point, if there is one. We have the whole object model where people have kind of very fundamental questions about how you substitute, how you build, how they relate. And we have the question then kind of at the spec level of, do we want to describe how some of this is done completely opaquely, and then inside a different document describe how to use those opaque identifiers to build something like a time-based priority or a visual field-based priority or something like that. And then we have a goal that was raised here to make sure that we all agree it's a goal, which is recovery after a severed connection. Is it something that we consider that to be any media over quick implementation should be able to recover after a severed connection and get you back to where you used to be? So those are all the things that we could possibly talk about tomorrow. And our question as chair to you is, thinking with your generalist hat on, what's top of mind? What is it you need to have answered to go through the next steps that you need to advance this protocol, right? Well, no, because you get to do it right now, because we're going to set the agenda for tomorrow right now. And if you guys have no input on that, Alan and I will stay a few minutes after, and we'll write something up. But this is a question for you, and it looks like Christian has the start of an answer, and I'll look at the queue here to see if there's anybody else.
Yeah. On the topics you mentioned, there is one that I like a lot, which is the managing reconnection. And there's one that I would like to punt, which is a CWIN issue. And the reason I want to punt the CWIN issue is that it's largely tied to work of other groups in the IETF, like TCPM or TS working group. And I don't believe that we can come, I mean, I don't believe it will be a useful use of our time, effectively.
Okay, can you capture that? I'm going to run the queue here. Okay.
Managing reconnection is yes, and punting CWIN.
Is let's punt, yep. Next up is Spencer.
Yeah, this is Spencer. I'm just asking, is the scope of what we're talking about now advancing the protocol specification, or is it also including the stuff from the requirements draft?
I was thinking more generally about advancing the work of the working group, so you can comment on either.
Okay, looking at the three issues that I put up, I think the one that might be most helpful for me, and I hope for James and other people in the working group, is the one about basically helping to define the and I'm calling them network entities. Basically relays and relays plus. Like, what do they do?
Okay. Suhas, you're next, and then Will.
Personally, I would like to, because we are building this generic MOQ protocol, I would like to understand, what aspects of the basically data model that relays need to understand, and what should be the kind of a model that subscribers should ask for, and how could relay kind of answer to those questions without tied to a particular application encoding. We want to keep this the operation of relays as generic as possible, and we need to build a model that works across the use cases that we have without tying down every possible use case application into the relays. That would be my.
Okay, Will?
Yeah, actually, Suhas just said it, which was, I think the object model is fundamental to our discussion, and while we have everybody here, that's something we should nail down. The other one is what I think Roberto, I don't know if you're typing it or not, it's an abstract way to request content with the equivalent of seeking, but maybe it's not seek. But how do I ask for certain things that may not just be the latest that's available on the relay? And is there a generic and more abstract way of defining how we do this? What use cases need it, and how can we do it?
Something like a uniform resource management system of some type. I don't know.
Yeah, it goes into caching and storage and retrieval because this is essentially live content, but I think it's a fundamental concept we need to support.
I have Alan next as an individual.
Yeah, I'll stand away from there. No chairs. This is a chairless meeting. I think I'm interested in what is the minimum set of things that we need to specify so that we can get a few people trying to build things that interoperate sooner rather than later. So thinking about what are the, kind of from the ground level. So object model, the messaging, minimal messaging, what can we do so that we can maybe have a hackathon soon?
Okay. So may I look over your shoulder despite the screen here? No, I want the doc to see what we're doing. So I think what we heard here, object model, fundamental, we have to continue discussing that. The understanding how the relays need to interact with the content, that is what information goes to the relays as opposed to just to the end users. So yes, what are these network elements and what do they need to know? I think that we'll cover it. the use case of managing reconnection and managing seeking. Those were two different things, but both which relate to this question of how do we identify resources in ways that allow larger scale systems to be built. Okay, so we're gonna put together a little bit of an agenda for tomorrow morning that concentrate on those. We'll publish that and we'll revisit at the end of the morning to see what we're going on into the afternoon. Now, I will just want to reassure you all, you're making progress. I know it may not feel like that. There are definitely moments after the first day of an interim where you feel like, oh, it's worse than it used to be. But it's sort of like cleaning up. First you put everything on the floor and then you repack it in better ways. So today has been a lot of putting things on the floor. That is progress as long as you don't stop here. So for those of you remote, we hope to see you tomorrow on Zoom. For those of you local, we hope to see you tomorrow here. We definitely have a lot of work ahead of us. Don't stop, but don't worry that today wasn't progress, because really it was. Thanks everybody for being here, and we will see you soon. Oh, Spencer, join the queue. Tell us what you need to say.
No, I was just going to ask, is there a specific place that we should be looking for the agenda after you all bash it? Just on the agenda page that we've been looking at all day?
Yes, we will update the agenda page and we will send the agenda for the morning to the list as well.
Fabulous.
And we can
Thank
also
you.
bash it in the morning, as is IETF tradition.
Thank you.
All right. Note well, we're done. See you soon.